Dust hangs in the air like memory suspended in shafts of light that cut through the general store's windows. A woman's weathered hands arrange cans with military precision, each movement deliberate, economical. These same hands once held justice, dealt death, brought order to lawless territories. Now they stock shelves in a town that knows her only as Maggie. Outside, thunder rolls not from clouds, but from approaching hoofbeats. 15 riders, armed men with cold eyes and colder intentions. The first gunshot shatters more than the afternoon silence. It fractures the careful peace she's built over 15 years of hiding, of bearing the woman they once called the Shadow Marshal. They say vengeance has a long memory. They say the past never truly dies. As the town's young sheriff crumples in the street, blood soaking into thirsty dirt, the woman pauses. Her hand twitches toward a weapon that isn't there not anymore. But beneath the floorboards of her quiet life, old ghosts and older guns wait. Some fires never stop burning. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The first light of dawn crept across Redemption Creek like a guilty confession. Maggie Callahan had been awake for hours already, as she was every morning. 62 years had worn lines into her face that matched the weathered boards of her general store, but they hadn't slowed her hands as she arranged canned goods on shelves with military precision. The store wouldn't open for another hour. These quiet moments belonged to her alone. Maggie paused, feeling the familiar ache in her right knee, an old bullet wound that the changing weather always awakened. She glanced toward the calendar hanging beside the register. October 17th, 15 years to the day since she'd buried her past along with her husband. The floorboards behind her creaked. Maggie's hand twitched almost imperceptibly toward her waistband, where a weapon should have been, before her mind caught up. "Morning, Mom." Sarah's voice was still thick with sleep. At 24, her adopted daughter moved through the world with the eager energy of youth, though her eyes carried a wisdom beyond her years. "You're up early again." Maggie turned, allowing herself a small smile. "Just getting ready for Mrs. Patterson's weekly order. You know how particular she is about having her goods waiting when she arrives." Sarah reached for a mug and poured herself coffee from the pot Maggie had brewed an hour earlier. She wore her chestnut hair in a loose braid, her clothes simple but neat, befitting her position as the town's schoolteacher. "You work too hard," Sarah said, sipping the strong black coffee without flinching. That was one of many things Maggie had taught her. The store runs itself these days. A place runs itself when the person running it makes it look that way. Maggie responded, her tone making clear this wasn't their first time having this conversation. Sarah leaned against the counter. "The children are putting together a town history project. I thought maybe you could come speak to them." Maggie stiffened slightly. "I've only been here 12 years, Sarah. Plenty of families go back generations. But you've seen more of the world than most folks here. The children would benefit from your perspective." Maggie reached for a rag and busied herself with wiping the already clean counter. "I doubt stories about ordering supplies and bargaining with distributors would hold their interest." Sarah studied her mother over the rim of her coffee cup. "You know that's not what I meant." A heavy silence filled the space between them. Maggie had raised Sarah since the girl was 12, after finding her orphaned in the aftermath of a bandit raid on a nearby settlement. In the years since, Sarah had pieced together fragments of Maggie's history, enough to know there were chapters her mother kept closed and locked. "I need to finish the inventory," Maggie said finally. "Don't you have lessons to prepare?" Sarah sighed, but knew better than to push. "Dinner at 6. Maggie nodded already, turning back to her shelves. "Have a good day with the children." After Sarah left, Maggie moved to the store's front windows. She looked out at Redemption Creek, a town that had accepted her without asking too many questions. The settlement had grown in the years since she'd arrived, now boasting nearly 500 souls. The silver mine 10 miles out had brought prosperity, and with it new buildings and businesses. Her gaze lingered on the sheriff's office across the street, where young Thomas Miller was just arriving to start his day. At 28, he was one of the youngest sheriffs in the territory, but he had a level head and steady hands. The townsfolk had been right to elect him after old Sheriff Wilson passed last spring. Maggie watched as Thomas unlocked the office door, tipped his hat to Mrs. Abernathy, sweeping her porch next door, and disappeared inside. A good man if inexperienced. She hoped he'd never need to face real trouble. As she turned away from the window, her eyes caught on the small locked cabinet behind the counter, the one that held her shotgun and a box of shells. Legal necessary protection for a woman running a business alone. No one questioned it. No one knew about the loose floorboard beneath her bed upstairs either, the one that concealed a worn leather bundle she hadn't unwrapped in 15 years. By midday, Maggie's store hummed with the usual activity. Mrs. Patterson had indeed collected her weekly order. Mr. Hollister had complained about the price of coffee, and 3 mining company men had purchased supplies for their camp. Routine, predictable, safe. Miss Maggie. A young voice pulled her attention to the counter where 10-year-old Billy Weber stood clutching a penny. Ma says I can get a peppermint stick if I finished all my chores. Maggie's usually stern expression softened. Did you finish your chores, Billy? The boy nodded emphatically, his cowlick bobbing. Fed the chickens, mucked the stalls, and chopped kindling, just like Ma said. Then I believe you've earned this. Maggie reached into the glass jar of candy sticks, selecting an especially thick one. She handed it to the boy, accepting his penny with a formal nod that made Billy stand a little straighter. As he turned to leave, the store door burst open. Sheriff Miller entered, his face tight with concern. Afternoon, Thomas, Maggie said, noting his expression. Everything all right? Miss Callahan. He nodded respectfully. Just making the rounds. Wanted to let folks know we've had reports of riders spotted to the north. Maggie's posture shifted subtly, an almost imperceptible straightening of her spine. Riders, group of about 15 men, likely nothing to worry about, but Carson's ranch hand said they were well armed. Thomas adjusted his gun belt, a nervous habit. Probably just passing through to Silver Springs. 15 armed men don't usually pass through anywhere, Sheriff. The statement came out sharper than Maggie intended. Thomas blinked, surprised at her tone. Just being cautious, ma'am. I've sent a rider to the neighboring towns to see if they've had any trouble. Maggie nodded, forcing herself to relax. That's wise. Let me know if you hear anything more. Super. After he left, Maggie found herself moving to the window again, scanning the horizon. The morning's clear blue sky had given way to gathering storm clouds. The town sat in a shallow valley with one main road running through it. Easily defensible part of her mind calculated before she could stop the thought. She spent the rest of the afternoon distracted serving customers while keeping one eye on the street outside. By closing time, no riders had appeared, and Maggie chided herself for the prickle of unease that had settled between her shoulder blades. 15 years in peace had softened her instincts. Sarah arrived just as Maggie was locking up, bringing with her the scent of chalk dust and paper. How were the children today? Maggie asked, leading the way upstairs to their living quarters above the store. Full of energy. Tommy Blake put a frog in Eliza Johnson's lunch pail. Shitty? Sarah hung her shawl on a peg by the door. I made him write an apology letter and help her with her arithmetic as penance. Judicious. Maggie approved, moving to the stove, where a pot of stew had been simmering. This was their ritual. Sarah taught Maggie minded the store, and they shared their days over dinner. Simple. Orderly. As they ate, Sarah recounted more tales from her classroom, while Maggie listened, interjecting occasional questions or observations. They were halfway through their meal when the first gunshot cracked the evening air. Both women froze. For one heartbeat, two, they stared at each other across the table. Then 3 more shots in rapid succession. Sarah started to rise. What? Stay here. Maggie's command was absolute as she moved to the window, keeping to the side to peer out without being seen. The street below was cast in long shadows, the gathering dusk broken by flickering torchlight. She could make out figures on horseback moving down the main street, at least a dozen men, maybe more. At the center of town, a body lay in the dirt. Even from this distance, Maggie recognized the glint of a sheriff's badge. Thomas, she whispered, a cold fury settling in her chest. Mom, what's happening? Sarah joined her at the window, then gasped. Is that? Go to the back room and lock the door. Maggie ordered, already moving across the floor to her bedroom. We have to help him. Ari, Sarah protested. He's beyond help. Maggie's voice was flat. She knelt beside her bed, pried up the loose floorboard, and pulled out the bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Do as I say, Sarah, now. Something in her tone made Sarah obey, though her face was pale with shock. Alone, Maggie unwrapped the bundle with practiced hands. Inside lay 2 Colt Navy revolvers, blued steel still gleaming despite the years. Beside them, a leather belt with ammunition loops, a hunting knife in a worn sheath, and a small star-shaped badge, U.S. Marshal. Her fingers hovered over the weapons for just a moment. Then, with movements as fluid and familiar as breathing, she checked each gun, loaded them, and secured them in the back of her waistband beneath her apron. The knife went into her boot. The badge she left in the bundle, wrapping it carefully before returning it to its hiding place. Maggie moved to the dresser, exchanging her apron for a dark shawl. As she did, her eyes caught on the small oval photograph frame that sat atop it, a stern-faced man with kind eyes in a U.S. Marshal's uniform. James Callahan, her husband. "Not yet," she whispered to the photograph. "But soon." The next morning dawned with Redemption Creek under occupation. The Riders, a gang led by a man calling himself Frank Blackwell, had taken control of the town with brutal efficiency. Sheriff Miller's body had been left in the street for hours before being dragged to the undertakers at gunpoint. Blackwell had established his headquarters in the Silverton Hotel, commandeering the finest suite. His men patrolled the streets, helping themselves to whatever caught their fancy from the town's businesses and intimidating anyone who objected. Maggie opened her store as usual, absorbing the fearful whispers of her customers as they came and went under the watchful eyes of Blackwell's men. She learned that 3 other townspeople had been killed in the initial takeover: Mr. Peterson from the bank, who had tried to resist when they emptied the safe; young Kyle Jefferson, who had rushed to the sheriff's aid; and Mrs. Abernathy, apparently for no reason other than she had screamed when they shot Miller. Around noon, the bell above the door jangled as 3 of Blackwell's men swaggered in. Their leader, a tall man with a pockmarked face and a cavalry hat, scanned the store before settling his gaze on Maggie. "You the owner?" he drawled. Maggie stood behind the counter, her posture straight, hands visible. "I am. We'll be taking supplies for the boss." He gestured to his companions, who began grabbing items off shelves. "Put it on the town's tab." He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Mr. Blackwell prefers quality goods, I imagine," Maggie said evenly. "Those canned peaches Hank just took are from last season. The fresh ones are on the top shelf." The man narrowed his eyes, trying to decide if she was mocking him. "You got a smart mouth, old woman." "I have a business to run," Maggie replied. "Even outlaws need to eat. I'd rather give you the good merchandise than have you come back complaining." After a moment, he laughed. "Boss said this town was full of scared rabbits. You got more spine than most." "Just practical," Maggie said. "Your boss plans to stay a while, I take it." The man grabbed a jar of tobacco from a display. "Long as it suits him. This town's going to help finance some bigger plans." He leaned across the counter. "Silver mine's real profitable, I hear." Maggie neither confirmed nor denied, simply watched as they looted her shelves. When they had filled 2 sacks with goods, the leader tipped his hat in mock courtesy. "Boss might want to meet you. Says he likes people with backbone, easier to tell when they break." He turned to leave, then paused. "They say you got a daughter. Pretty school teacher." Maggie's expression didn't change, but her right hand twitched ever so slightly. "You tell that daughter to be respectful when our boys come calling." His grin returned. "We're the law now." After they left, Maggie closed her fist so tightly that her nails cut into her palm. The first drops of blood had just welled up when Sarah burst through the back entrance, her face flushed with anger. "They've closed the school," she exclaimed. "Posted guards and sent the children home. They said education's not a priority anymore." Maggie released her hand, wiping it discreetly on her apron. "Are you all right? Did they harm any of the children?" "No, but they frightened them terribly." Sarah paced the small area behind the counter. "Jimmy Carson was crying. His father works at the mine. They took all the men there at gunpoint this morning to keep working." "Sarah, listen to me." Maggie grasped her daughter's shoulders. "I need you to stay calm. Stay in the store with me or upstairs. Don't antagonize these men." Sarah pulled back. "We can't just do nothing. Thomas is dead, Mrs. Abernathy." "I know." Maggie's voice was steel. "But getting yourself killed won't help anyone. The telegraph office is smashed. We're cut off." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of frustration. "Someone needs to get word to the territorial marshal." "The nearest marshal's office is 3 days' hard ride," Maggie reminded her. "And they've likely got men watching the trails." "Then we fight back ourselves," Sarah hissed. "There are 500 people in this town, and maybe 20 of them. If we organized against armed killers with pitchforks and kitchen knives—" Maggie shook her head. These aren't just bandits, Sarah. These are professional gunmen. I've seen their kind before. Sarah studied her mother's face. Have you, when Maggie turned away, busying herself with straightening items on a shelf? That's not important now. What matters is keeping as many people alive as possible until help comes or they move on. And if they don't move on, Sarah challenged, what if they're still here next month? Next year? Maggie had no answer that wouldn't reveal too much. Instead, she said, we watch, we wait, we look for weaknesses, but we don't act rashly. Sarah wasn't satisfied, but she dropped the subject for the moment. That night, after closing the store, they ate dinner in tense silence. From their window, they could see Blackwell's men drinking and carousing at the saloon across the street. Occasionally, gunshots rang out, followed by coarse laughter. I'm going to bed, Sarah said, finally setting down her hardly touched plate. Maggie nodded. Try to get some rest. After Sarah retired to her room, Maggie extinguished all but one lamp and sat by the window watching. Around midnight, a figure stumbled out of the saloon, one of Blackwell's lieutenants, judging by the deference shown by the others. He weaved drunkenly across the street and pounded on the door of the doctor's office until the light came on and Doc Parker appeared hastily dressed. Even from her vantage point, Maggie could see the doctor's reluctance as he admitted the man. 10 minutes later, the outlaw emerged again, tucking something into his jacket. Laudanum, most likely, or morphine. The doctor's stock of medicines would be as valuable to these men as the bank's gold. Maggie's mind cataloged the information addiction's weaknesses, but she tamped down the strategic thinking that came so naturally. That was Margaret Harrington's way, not Maggie Callahan's. She was a storekeeper now, a mother, not a legendary lawman they once called the Shadow Marshal. But as she finally retired to bed, Maggie found herself counting the weapons hidden throughout the apartment, planning escape routes, assessing defensive positions. Old habits, buried but not forgotten. Days stretched into weeks. October gave way to November, and Redemption Creek settled into an uneasy routine under Blackwell's rule. The mine operated at gunpoint with the profits flowing directly to the gang. Businesses remained open, though half their goods were requisitioned without payment. People moved through the streets with downcast eyes, careful not to attract attention. Maggie watched and listened. She noted which of Blackwell's men were cruel for cruelty's sake, which could be reasoned with, which were most loyal to their leader. She observed their patrol patterns, their habits, their disputes. And she worried about Sarah. Her daughter had grown increasingly restless and defiant. Twice Maggie had caught her in whispered conversations with young Timothy Weber, Billy's older brother, that abruptly ended when Maggie approached. Sarah came home later each evening, offering vague explanations about helping neighbors or checking on former students. On a particularly cold evening in late November, Maggie confronted her as she slipped in well after dark. "Where have you been?" Maggie demanded, arms crossed, as she stood blocking the stairs to their apartment. Sarah removed her shawl, her cheeks flushed from the cold or from something else. "Visiting Emma Johnson. Her little brother has a cough. Emma lives 3 blocks away. You've been gone 4 hours," Sarah sighed. "I stopped by the parsonage after. Reverend Walsh is concerned about dwindling supplies for the poorest families." "Sarah," Maggie's voice softened, "I know that's not all. You're planning something with Timothy and the others, aren't you?" Sarah's silence was confirmation enough. "Whatever you're thinking, it's too dangerous," Maggie pressed. "These men are killers. They've done this before. Nahari, and they'll do it again to another town if no one stops them." Sarah's composure cracked. "While we hide and wait, they take and take. 3 women have been—" She broke off, her expression hardening. "I'm not a child anymore, Mom. I can make my own decisions. Decisions that could get you and others killed." "Like you haven't faced danger before," Sarah challenged. "I've seen how you watch them, how you note their movements, their weaknesses. You know how to fight, how to plan. Why won't you help us?" Maggie's jaw tightened. "That's not who I am anymore." "It's exactly who you are." Sarah stepped closer. "I've seen the calluses on your hands, not just a shopkeeper's hands. I've watched how you move, always aware, always ready. Whoever you were before you came here, you knew violence. And I left it behind for a reason." Maggie's voice was barely above a whisper. "Well, it's found us anyway." Sarah moved past her toward the stairs. "If you won't help, I'll find people who will." That night Maggie lay awake, Sarah's words echoing in her mind. She had built this life so carefully, stone by stone, year by year. A quiet existence, a penance of sorts, though the people of Redemption Creek would never understand for what. In the darkness she could almost hear James's voice. You can't outrun who you are, Maggie. Sooner or later the past finds everyone. By dawn, Sarah had already left the apartment. A hastily scribbled note on the table claimed another early meeting with the Reverend. Maggie didn't believe it for a moment. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Customers were fewer now, with money tight and spirits low. Around midday, Maggie served Mrs. Weber, who purchased only a small bag of flour and seemed distracted. Is everything all right with your family, Mrs. Weber? Maggie asked carefully. The woman startled. Yes, fine, just fine. Her eyes darted toward the door. Timothy's been helping with extra chores. Such a good boy. Maggie nodded slowly. And Billy? How is he? Oh, he misses school. Sarah was such a wonderful teacher. Mrs. Weber clutched her purchase. We all hope things go back to normal soon. Indeed, Maggie agreed, watching the woman hurry away. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Whatever Sarah and her friends were planning, it involved more of the town than Maggie had realized. Just before closing time, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting then, the distinctive sound of rifle fire. Maggie moved to the door in time to see a group of Blackwell's men dragging 5 bound figures down the street toward the hotel. Her heart stopped when she recognized Sarah among them, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. Beside her stumbled Timothy Weber, his face bruised and swollen, and 3 other young people from the town. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the disturbance. Blackwell himself emerged from the hotel, a tall figure in a black duster. Even from a distance, Maggie could see his cold smile as he surveyed the captives. His voice carried in the winter air. Seems we have some would-be heroes in our midst. Found them with these. He held up several revolvers and a stick of dynamite. Planning a little uprising, the crowd murmured fearfully. Blackwell paced before the kneeling prisoners. Now I'm a reasonable man, he continued. I understand the impulse to protect what's yours, but I can't have this kind of behavior. He stopped in front of Sarah. Especially not from such a fine, educated young lady. Maggie's hand moved to her waistband before she remembered she wasn't armed. Not openly, at least. I believe in object lessons, Blackwell announced to the town. So tomorrow at noon, these 5 conspirators will be executed right here in the street. A reminder of what happens to those who defy the new order in Redemption Creek. Gasps and cries rose from the crowd. Mrs. Weber collapsed, wailing for her son. Mr. Johnson lunged forward only to be clubbed down by one of Blackwell's men. Take them to the jail, Blackwell ordered, and post extra guards. If anyone tries to free them, shoot them on sight. As they dragged the prisoners away, Sarah's eyes found Maggie in the crowd. There was fear there, yes, but also defiance and a silent plea. Maggie stood immobile, her face a careful mask. Only when the street had cleared, the captives secured in the jailhouse that had once been Sheriff Miller's office, did she finally move. She closed the store, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to her apartment with measured steps. Inside, she went directly to her bedroom and knelt beside the bed. The floorboard came up easily, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Maggie unwrapped the oilcloth bundle and laid its contents on the bed, the 2 Colt Navy revolvers, the ammunition belt, the knife, and the U.S. Marshal's badge. For 15 years, Margaret Shadow Marshal Harrington had been buried. For 15 years, Maggie Callahan had lived a quiet life of atonement. But now, as she strapped on the belt and checked her weapons with hands that remembered every motion, she knew the reckoning had come. Redemption Creek had given her shelter when she needed it most. Now it and Sarah needed the person she had tried so hard to leave behind. Maggie pinned the badge to the inside of her jacket where it would remain hidden until the right moment. Then she moved to the dresser and lifted the photograph of her husband. Looks like I'll be joining you sooner than I planned, James, she whispered, but I'll be damned if I go alone. The Shadow Marshal had returned. The night wrapped around Redemption Creek like a shroud. Most windows were dark, their occupants retreating into fearful silence after the day's events. Only the saloon and the hotel blazed with light, raucous laughter, occasionally piercing the cold air as Blackwell's men celebrated their triumph over the would-be rebels. Maggie Callahan, no Margaret Harrington, now moved through the darkness with the fluid grace of a predator. 15 years might have passed, but her body remembered this dance. She kept to the shadows, avoiding the patches of moonlight that spilled across the dusty street. Her dark clothing blended with the night, the weight of the guns at her hips, a familiar comfort. Her first destination was clear the small house at the edge of town where Doc Parker had lived and worked for nearly 30 years. If anyone in Redemption Creek might help her, it would be him. Not just because he was a healer sworn to aid those in need, but because Robert Parker was the only person in town who knew exactly who she had been. The doctor's house was dark, but Maggie detected the faint glow of a lamp behind heavy curtains. She approached from the rear, avoiding the main street, and tapped softly on the back door. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. An old signal from another life. The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd forgotten or if he was too afraid to respond. Then came the soft shuffling of feet, and the door opened a crack. Doc Parker's weathered face peered out, his gray eyes widening at the sight of her. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, "it really is you." "May I come in, Robert?" Her voice was lower, flatter than Maggie Callahan's usual tones. He glanced past her into the darkness, then opened the door wider. Quickly. Inside the doctor's kitchen was warm but sparsely furnished. A pot of coffee simmered on the stove, filling the air with its bitter scent. Robert Parker was in his 70s now, his once robust frame bent with age, but his hands remained steady as he poured 2 cups. "I wondered when this day would come," he said, setting a cup before her. "Though I prayed it wouldn't." Maggie didn't touch the coffee. "They have Sarah." Parker nodded grimly. "I heard. The whole town's talking about the planned execution tomorrow." He studied her face. "You're going after them." "I need your help." Margaret Harrington asking for help. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. The world truly has changed. "I'm not as young as I was, Robert, and there are at least 20 of them." Her eyes held his. "I need to know who in this town can fight, who can be trusted, and who might have access to weapons." Parker sank into a chair across from her. "You're talking about raising a militia against professional killers. These aren't just townspeople with guns we're dealing with. Blackwell's crew are hardened outlaws. I've faced worse. Yes, with a badge and the authority of the law behind you." He leaned forward. "The woman I patched up 15 years ago swore she was done with that life. Said too many people had died because of her crusade." A muscle twitched in Maggie's jaw. "Circumstances change. Because it's Sarah this time." It wasn't a question. Maggie finally reached for the coffee, needing something to occupy her hands. "She's all I have left, Robert. I won't watch her die." The old doctor sighed deeply. "I always knew that girl would be trouble from the moment you brought her here. Too much fire in her, too much of your own stubbornness." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "What exactly are you planning?" "First, we need to get a look at the jail, see how they're guarding the prisoners." Maggie took a sip of coffee, grimacing at its bitterness. "Then we need to assemble a group willing to fight people with skills, courage. And if we succeed, if we free Sarah and the others, Blackwell won't just leave." "No," Maggie agreed, her eyes cold. "He won't." Parker held her gaze for a long moment. Then he rose and moved to a cabinet in the corner. From behind a stack of medical texts, he withdrew a wooden box. "I still have this," he said, opening the lid to reveal an Army Colt revolver in a box of ammunition. "Army surgeon, remember, never could bring myself to get rid of it." "Can you still shoot?" A wry smile. "I can hit what I aim at, if that's what you're asking." Maggie nodded. "Who else in town has a stomach for this?" Parker considered. "Michael Hayes, the blacksmith. He's got arms like tree trunks and a temper to match. Lost his brother to outlaws some years back. He'll fight." Stu tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. "Maria Vasquez, who runs the saloon. Don't let her dresses fool you. I've seen her throw grown men twice her size out of her establishment." "The saloon?" Maggie frowned. "Blackwell's men practically live there." "Which means she sees and hears everything. Maria's no friend to these invaders. They helped themselves to her best whiskey and threatened her girls." Parker continued his list. "Robert Gray lives just outside town. Former cavalry, keeps to himself. Been acting as unofficial law since they killed Sheriff Miller." "And James Miller," Maggie added. "Thomas's younger brother. I've seen him watching Blackwell's men marking them." Parker's expression darkened. "James is a hothead. Brave, yes, but reckless. Been drinking heavily since Thomas was killed." We need every hand we can get. Maggie stood. Can you get messages to these people? Tell them to meet us. She paused, considering. The old mine office on the north edge of town. It's been abandoned since the new operation started. And you, Parker asked, rising as well. I'm going to take a closer look at the jail. She moved toward the door, then hesitated. Robert, I should warn you. Once this starts... I know, he said quietly. No going back. Margaret Harrington returns from the dead, and Maggie Callahan disappears forever. She nodded once, her face grim. They called you the Shadow Marshal, didn't they? Parker mused. Said you could track a man across 3 territories and never be seen until it was too late. That was a long time ago. Perhaps. The old doctor reached out, squeezing her shoulder briefly. But legends have a way of rising again when they're needed most. The town jail was a small, sturdy building of stone and timber built to house, at most, a half-dozen prisoners in its 2 cells. From her vantage point on the roof of the abandoned barber shop across the street, Maggie observed 4 guards, 2 outside the front entrance, 1 patrolling the rear, and 1 visible through the windows inside. All were armed with revolvers, and the 2 at the front door carried rifles as well. More concerning was the regular patrol that circled the town every half hour, 3 riders checking each street and alley. Breaking the prisoners out would require perfect timing and coordination. After memorizing the guards' patterns, Maggie slipped away, making her way to the abandoned mine office. The small wooden structure sat atop a low hill, offering a view of the town below. Inside, Doc Parker had already arrived with Michael Hayes, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and forearms corded with muscle. Ms. Callahan, Hayes acknowledged with a nod. Despite the late hour, his eyes were alert. Doc says you're planning something about tomorrow's execution. Mr. Hayes. Maggie evaluated him with a professional eye, strong, steady, determined. I need to know where you stand on taking action against Blackwell and his men. Hayes's expression hardened. My sister-in-law and her children live in fear daily. My forge is used to repair their weapons and shoes for their horses, while I get scraps for my work. His massive hands clenched. I've been wanting to do something since they murdered Sheriff Miller, but no one seemed willing to stand up. We're standing now, came a new voice from the doorway. Maria Vasquez entered, her dark hair pulled back severely, her usual colorful dress replaced by a practical blouse and skirt. Though some of us have been planning longer than others. Maria, Maggie nodded respectfully. Thank you for coming. Sarah is like a daughter to me as well, the saloon keeper replied. She's been meeting the young people at my place after hours planning their resistance. I warned her they weren't ready, but she shrugged eloquently. 2 more figures appeared in the doorway. Robert Gray, a lean, weathered man with the unmistakable posture of military training, and James Miller, younger and rawer, with reddened eyes and a perpetual scowl. So this is the Grand Rebellion, Miller said, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. 5 of us against 20 killers. 6, Doc Parker corrected, and we're not charging in blindly. Then what's the plan? Gray asked, directing the question to Maggie. His shrewd eyes assessed her clearly, noting the weapons she now wore openly. And who exactly are you, Ms. Callahan? You've run the general store for years, yet suddenly you're organizing an armed resistance. The moment had come sooner than Maggie expected. She took a deep breath, then reached inside her jacket and withdrew the badge she'd kept hidden for 15 years. My name is Margaret Harrington, United States Marshal. She placed the badge on the table between them. Or I was before I came to Redemption Creek. A stunned silence fell over the room. Shadow Marshal, Gray whispered finally, recognition dawning. I thought you were dead. James Miller stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. You've been here all this time, a federal marshal living among us while we had no proper law enforcement. While my brother was killed, I retired from that life, Maggie said evenly. Retired, Miller spat, while good men died. That's enough, Doc Parker interjected. Margaret came to this town broken in body and spirit. She had every right to seek peace after what she'd endured. What happened? Hayes asked quietly. Maggie's eyes grew distant. 15 years ago, I was hunting the Bishop gang murderers and thieves who'd terrorized 3 territories. My husband, James Callahan, was my partner, both as a marshal and in life. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened. We trapped them in a canyon near the Mexican border. But someone had warned them we were coming. They were waiting for us. She paused, the memories washing over her like a physical wave. James was killed, shot in the back while trying to negotiate their surrender. I was wounded, left for dead. Her gaze returned to the present, hardening. I tracked them for 2 months after I recovered. Found them in a mining camp north of here. I killed 11 men that day, including Luther Bishop himself. And then you disappeared. Gray nodded slowly. The story said you died of your wounds afterward. Others claimed you'd gone to Mexico. I came here to escape that life, to atone for the violence I'd brought into the world. Maggie reclaimed her badge, tucking it away. But now Blackwell threatens everything and everyone I've come to care about. I won't stand by while Sarah and the others die. So what's your plan? Marshall, Maria asked, practical as ever. Not Marshall anymore, Maggie corrected. Just a woman defending her home. She moved to the dirty window, gesturing for them to gather around. The jail is heavily guarded, but not impenetrable. We need to create a diversion to draw off the outer guards, then neutralize those inside. Over the next hour, they formulated a plan. Hayes would create several small-timed explosive devices from mining blasting powder to create diversions on the opposite side of town. Maria, whose business allowed her to move freely even under occupation, would smuggle weapons to a spot near the jail. Gray and Miller would tackle the guards outside while Maggie would enter and deal with those within. And afterward, Gray asked, once we've freed the prisoners, Blackwell will come down on this town with everything he has. That's why we don't stop with freeing the prisoners, Maggie explained. This has to be the beginning of retaking Redemption Creek, not just a rescue mission. We'll need safe houses, prepared a communication system, defensive positions. You're talking about war, Miller said, but his tone had shifted from accusation to something like respect. Blackwell brought the war, Maggie replied. We're just finally fighting back. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they finalized their preparations. The jailbreak would happen at 11:01 hour before the scheduled execution, when Blackwell's men would be preparing for the spectacle rather than expecting resistance. Get some rest, Maggie advised as they prepared to disperse. Tomorrow we'll test all of us. As the others filed out, Doc Parker remained behind. You didn't tell them everything, he said quietly when they were alone. Maggie shook her head. They don't need to know that James was betrayed by someone we trusted, or that I never found out who. Her eyes met his. That's old history, Robert. What matters now is the present. And if you succeed, if you drive Blackwell out, what then? The doctor studied her face. Will Margaret Harrington disappear again? I don't know, she admitted. I've lived as Maggie Callahan for so long now. Sometimes I forget who I was before. Perhaps who you were and who you've become aren't as different as you think. Parker squeezed her shoulder again. Get some rest, Margaret. Tomorrow Redemption Creek will need both the shopkeeper and the marshal. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Frost rimmed the windows of the general store as Maggie moved methodically through her preparations. She oiled her weapons, strapped on her knife, and braided her silver-streaked hair tightly against her head. The familiar rituals calmed her mind, focusing her thoughts on the task ahead. At 9 o'clock, she opened the store as usual. A few customers drifted in, their faces tense with the knowledge of what noon would bring. Maggie served them with the same quiet efficiency she always showed, giving no indication that anything was amiss. When Mrs. Weber entered hollow-eyed with grief, Maggie slipped her a folded note along with her purchases. Be ready. Keep the children inside after 10:30. The woman's eyes widened fractionally, but she gave no other sign of having received the message. By 10 o'clock, the town had taken on an eerie quiet. Blackwell's men were constructing a crude gallows in the main street, an unnecessary showmanship, since Maggie knew they planned to simply shoot the prisoners. The platform was merely for effect to maximize the terror among the townspeople. At 10:30, Maggie closed the store. She left through the back entrance, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder containing ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Moving through the network of alleys behind the buildings, she made her way toward the rendezvous point, a storage shed behind the Cooper's workshop just a block from the jail. Maria was already there, having successfully delivered 3 revolvers and a shotgun as promised. Hayes is in position, she whispered as Maggie entered. Gray and Miller are circling around from the north. Maggie nodded, checking her timepiece. 20 minutes until the distraction. Are the safe houses ready? The old Wilkins mine shaft is prepared. Food, water, blankets. Maria's dark eyes were resolute. My girls have been spreading the word discreetly after the jailbreak. Any who need shelter should make their way there. They waited in tense silence as the minutes ticked by. Through a crack in the shed wall, they could see Blackwell's men gathering in the street preparing for their grim spectacle. The townsfolk, too, were being herded into the area, forced to witness the execution. At precisely 10:55, the first explosion rocked the northern edge of town. Smoke billowed from an abandoned warehouse, flames licking at its wooden walls. Shouts rang out as several of Blackwell's men raced toward the fire. 3 minutes later, a second explosion came from the opposite direction, another diversion by Hayes, this one closer to the mine office, where Blackwell kept his ammunition stores. That's our cue, Maggie said, checking her revolvers one last time. Stay low, move fast. They slipped from the shed, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. As they approached the jail, Maggie could see the confusion among the guards. Two had already run to help with the fires, leaving just one man at the front door, and presumably one inside. Across the street, Gray appeared, stumbling as if drunk. A perfect distraction. The guard straightened hand, moving to his gun. Hey, get back to the square with the others, he barked. Gray weaved closer, slurring apologies. As the guard stepped forward to intercept him, Miller appeared from behind, a length of rope in his hands. In a smooth motion, he looped it around the guard's neck and pulled tight. The man struggled, silently clawing at the rope, then went limp as Gray delivered a precise blow to his temple. They dragged the unconscious guard into the shadows, and Maggie moved. In 3 swift strides, she reached the jail door and slipped inside. The interior was dim after the bright morning light. The remaining guard sat at the desk, half risen in alarm at the sounds of explosion. He reached for his gun, but Maggie was faster. Her Colt barked once the bullet taking him through the shoulder. He collapsed with a cry of pain. Keys, she demanded, pressing the still smoking barrel against his cheek. Pocket, he gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Maggie retrieved the ring of keys, then struck him hard with the butt of her revolver. He slumped unconscious. The cells were at the back of the room, 2 small chambers with iron bars. Sarah and Timothy occupied one, the other 3 young rebels in the adjacent cell. They rushed to the bars as Maggie appeared. Mom! Sarah's voice was thick with disbelief. The cut on her forehead had been cleaned but not bandaged. Stand back, Maggie ordered, trying keys in the lock. The third one turned, and the cell door swung open. She moved quickly to the second cell, freeing the others. What's happening? Timothy asked, his bruised face confused. Are you? No time for questions. Maggie cut him off. Follow me, stay low, do exactly as I say. She led them to the rear door where Maria waited. Take them to the safe house, Maggie instructed. I need to find Hayes and the others. Sarah grabbed her arm. Mom, Blackwell will kill you if he finds out. He'll have to catch me first, Maggie replied, squeezing her daughter's hand briefly. Go with Maria. I'll find you later. As Maria led the freed prisoners away, Maggie circled back toward the town square. The confusion from the explosions had worked perfectly. Most of Blackwell's men were scattered, trying to contain the fires or locate the source of the attack. But it wouldn't take them long to discover the empty jail and realize they'd been outmaneuvered. She found Hayes near the livery stable, watching his handiwork from a safe distance. The prisoners are free, she told him. Have you seen Gray and Miller? Gray was heading to gather more men from the south end of town, Hayes replied. Miller. He broke off, his expression darkening. He said something about settling a personal score. Maggie's gut tightened. He's going after Blackwell directly. The fool will get himself killed and expose our entire operation before we're ready. Maggie checked her ammunition. Get to the Wilkins mine. Help Maria organize our defenses there. I'll find Miller. Hayes hesitated. You shouldn't go alone. I'll move faster by myself. Her tone brooked no argument. Go before Blackwell's men regroup. Shachunoorn. As Hayes reluctantly departed, Maggie made her way toward the hotel where Blackwell had established his headquarters. The street was in chaos now, townspeople running for shelter, Blackwell's men shouting contradictory orders, the fires still burning at opposite ends of town. She spotted Miller across the square, moving purposefully toward the hotel, a rifle clenched in his hands. His face was a mask of hatred, his intentions clear. James, Hano Shurinon, she called, pitching her voice to carry through the din without alerting others. He either didn't hear or chose to ignore her disappearing around the corner of the building. Cursing under her breath, Maggie followed. She found him at the side entrance, preparing to kick in the door. "This isn't the plan," she hissed, grabbing his arm. Miller wrenched away. "Your plan was just to free the prisoners. Mine is to kill the monster who murdered my brother. And if you die in the attempt, what good does that do, Redemption Creek? At least Thomas will have justice." Miller's eyes burned with grief and rage. "This isn't justice. It's suicide." Maggie positioned herself between Miller and the door. "Blackwell has at least 5 men with him in there. Even if you got to him, you'd never make it out alive." "I don't care." "Well, I do." Maggie's voice softened slightly. "Your brother was a good man, James. He believed in law and doing things right. This isn't what he would want." Miller's resolve wavered. "They killed him like he was nothing. Left him in the dirt. I know, and Blackwell will pay for that and everything else. But not like this, not today." She held out her hand. "Come with me now. We need every fighter for what's ahead." For a long moment she thought he would refuse. Then slowly the wild light in his eyes dimmed. He lowered the rifle. "You promise me he'll pay?" Miller asked, his voice rough. "On my badge and my husband's grave," Maggie replied solemnly. They had just turned to leave when the hotel door burst open. 2 of Blackwell's men emerged, guns already drawn. "They're the jailbreakers," one shouted. Maggie shoved Miller hard, sending him sprawling as bullets whizzed overhead. She rolled to the side, coming up firing. Her first shot caught the lead man in the chest. He dropped like a stone. The second man got off another wild shot before Maggie's bullet found him. The damage was done. Shouts rang out from inside the hotel, and Maggie could see more of Blackwell's gang converging from across the square. "Run!" she commanded Miller, hauling him to his feet. "To the mine now!" They sprinted down the alley, bullets splintering the wood around them. Maggie fired back twice, not aiming to hit, but to slow the pursuit. They rounded a corner, then another, weaving through the warren of outbuildings behind the main street. "This way," Miller gasped, pointing to a narrow passage between 2 warehouses. "Shortcut to the North Road." They squeezed through, emerging on a quieter street. The sounds of pursuit had diminished, but Maggie knew it was temporary. Soon Blackwell would have his entire force searching for them. "How far to the Wilkins mine?" she asked as they jogged northward. "1.5 miles," Miller replied. "Through those trees, then up into the hills." They had almost reached the tree line when Maggie heard the thunder of hooves behind them. Glancing back, she saw 4 riders bearing down fast. "Go," she pushed Miller ahead. "I'll hold them off. Tell the others to prepare. Blackwell will be coming in force." "But—" "Go!" Maggie turned, dropping to one knee and raising her Colt. She fired twice, deliberately missing the riders but striking one horse. The animal went down with a scream, throwing its rider. The other horseman veered, seeking cover. Maggie used the moment to retreat into the trees, moving from trunk to trunk, firing occasionally to keep them at bay. She had no illusions about defeating 4 armed men alone. Her goal was simply to buy Miller time to reach the others. A bullet splintered bark near her head. Another tore through her sleeve, grazing her arm. Maggie hissed but kept moving deeper into the forest, leading the pursuers away from the path to the mine. For 20 minutes she played this deadly game of cat and mouse, using every trick she'd learned in 15 years as a marshal. The terrain worked to her advantage. Rocky outcroppings provided cover. Dense undergrowth obscured her movements. She wounded 1 more pursuer before the remaining men finally retreated, unwilling to be picked off one by one. Only when she was certain they had gone did Maggie allow herself to examine her own injury. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow across her upper arm. Painful, but not serious. She bound it with a strip torn from her shirt and oriented herself toward the Wilkins mine. The old shaft had been abandoned when the new silver vein was discovered 5 years earlier. Its entrance was partially collapsed, seemingly unsafe, which made it perfect as a hiding place. As Maggie approached the weathered timbers that marked the entrance, a voice called softly from the shadows. "That's far enough." She recognized Gray's steady tone. "It's Harrington." Gray emerged from his hiding place, rifle lowered. "Wasn't sure you'd make it. Miller arrived half an hour ago, babbling about a shootout at the hotel. Blackwell's men spotted us. I led them away from the mine." Maggie winced as she flexed her injured arm. "How are things here?" "Organized, thanks to Maria. Come see." He led her into the mine entrance past a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. What Maggie saw there stopped her in her tracks. The chamber had been transformed into a makeshift headquarters. Lanterns hung from support beams, illuminating nearly 30 people, not just the prisoners they'd freed and their original resistance group, but miners, shopkeepers, and farmers. They were organizing weapons, preparing food, establishing sleeping areas. In one corner, Doc Parker had set up a medical station where he was treating Timothy Weber's facial injuries. And at the center of it all stood Sarah, calmly giving directions. She looked up as Maggie entered, relief washing over her face. "Mom!" She rushed forward, embracing Maggie tightly before pulling back to examine the bloody bandage. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Maggie assured her. "A scratch." She gestured at the bustling activity around them. "What is all this?" "Your daughter has been planning this resistance longer than you realized," Maria explained, approaching with a cup of water for Maggie. "While you were watching Blackwell's men, she was organizing the townspeople, identifying those who could fight, securing supplies, mapping hiding places." Maggie looked at Sarah with new eyes. "You did this?" Sarah nodded, a hint of defiance in her posture. "I knew you wouldn't approve. You always taught me to be cautious to avoid conflict, but some things are worth fighting for." She straightened. "I learned that from watching you, even if you never spoke of your past." Before Maggie could respond, Hayes appeared from a side tunnel. "Movement in town," he reported grimly. "Blackwell's gathered his men. They're searching house by house, and they've set fire to the general store." Maggie's home, her business, everything she'd built in Redemption Creek, gone. She absorbed the news with a calmness that surprised even her. "Casualties?" "None reported yet. Most people either fled to the hills or are hiding with sympathizers." Hayes looked troubled. "But Blackwell's taken hostages, the Reverend the banker and his wife, old Mrs. Patterson. Says he'll execute one every hour until the rebels surrender." "History repeats," Maggie murmured. Then louder, "We need to convene a war council. This just became about more than freeing prisoners." Sarah looked at her steadily. "It was always about more than that, Mom. It's about taking back our town." Within the hour, Maggie had organized the core resistance around a rough map of Redemption Creek scratched into the dirt floor. Hayes Gray, Maria Miller, and Doc Parker formed her inner circle, with Sarah acting as liaison to the younger townspeople. "Blackwell has us outnumbered and outgunned," Maggie began bluntly. "But we have advantages too. We know this territory. We have support among the population. And they don't expect a coordinated resistance." "They do now," Miller pointed out. "After the jailbreak." "They know someone freed the prisoners," Maggie corrected. "They don't know how many we are or what resources we have. We need to maintain that uncertainty, strike in different places, disappear before they can respond, make them believe we're everywhere." "Guerrilla tactics," Gray nodded approvingly. "Like we used against the Apaches in '59. "Exactly." Maggie traced routes on the map. "Small teams, hit-and-run attacks. We target their supplies, their horses, their comfort. Make staying in Redemption Creek more trouble than it's worth." "And the hostages?" Sarah asked quietly. Maggie's face darkened. "That's more complicated. We can't abandon them, but a frontal assault would be suicide. So we need a distraction," Maria suggested. "Something that forces Blackwell to deploy his men elsewhere." "Sure, no. Or something that divides his forces," Hayes added. "If we could lure some of them away from town." They debated strategies long into the evening. By nightfall, they had formulated their first series of moves. Gray would lead a small team to disable Blackwell's horses and wagons. Hayes would target their ammunition stores. Maria's network of saloon girls and servants would gather intelligence and sabotage food supplies. Miller would establish observation posts around town to track enemy movements. "What about you?" Sarah asked Maggie as the others dispersed to prepare. "I'll focus on the hostages," Maggie replied, "and on Blackwell himself." Sarah studied her mother's face. "You've changed since this morning. You seem different." "I am different." Maggie touched the U.S. Marshal's badge she now wore openly on her belt. "For 15 years, I've been hiding from who I really am. Maybe it's time I stopped running." "Tell me about him," Sarah said suddenly. "About James Callahan." Maggie's expression softened. "He was a good man. Principled, brave, stubborn as hell." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He would have loved you, Sarah. He always wanted children. She paused, old grief washing through her. We were tracking the Bishop gang when he was killed. Someone betrayed our position, we never found out who. Is that why you left that life behind, because of his death? Partly. Maggie's eyes grew distant. After I took down Bishop, I realized I'd become something I didn't recognize anymore. The hunt had consumed me, turned me cold. I killed 11 men that day, Sarah. Some deserved it, but others... She shook her head. I couldn't be that person anymore. And now, Sarah asked gently. Maggie met her gaze. Now I remember that the badge stands for something more than vengeance. It stands for justice, for protection of the innocent. She touched Sarah's cheek. You helped me remember that. Their moment was interrupted by a commotion at the mine entrance. Miller burst in, supporting a bleeding Robert Gray. Ambush! Miller gasped as Doc Parker rushed forward. They were waiting for us at the livery. Gray's face was ashen blood soaking his left side. Knew our plans, he managed through clenched teeth. Someone talked. Maggie helped lower him onto a blanket as the doctor examined the wound. What happened exactly? We were setting charges under the wagon axles, Miller explained. They opened fire from the hayloft like they were expecting us. Gray took a bullet, pushing me out of the way. Maggie felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Hayes, the others! Miller shook his head. Hayes got away. 2 others didn't make it. A traitor. The revelation sent shockwaves through the resistance camp. Fear and suspicion spread quickly as people wondered who among them couldn't be trusted. Listen to me. Maggie addressed the assembled group, her voice cutting through the murmurs. This changes our tactics, not our resolve. From now on, mission details are shared only with those directly involved. No one discusses plans outside their immediate team. How do we know who to trust? Someone called from the back. You trust me, Maggie stated firmly, and those I designate as team leaders. This isn't a democracy, it's a fight for survival. The harshness of her words silenced the crowd. Sarah watched her with a mixture of surprise and growing respect. As the others dispersed, Doc Parker beckoned Maggie to Gray's side. The bullet went clean through, he reported quietly. He's lost blood, but should recover with rest. Gray gripped Maggie's hand weakly. It was too perfect, Marshal, he whispered. They knew exactly where we'd be when we'd be there. Save your strength, she advised. We'll find the traitor. But as she moved away, Maggie's mind was racing. Only 6 people had known the details of Gray's mission, the core leadership group and Sarah. One of them had betrayed their plans to Blackwell. The question was who. Over the next 3 days, the resistance fought a series of small, brutal engagements. Despite the betrayal, they managed to strike several significant blows, burning Blackwell's stored supplies, killing 3 of his men, in an ambush freeing one of the hostages during a transfer. But Blackwell responded with increasing brutality. 2 townspeople suspected of aiding the resistance were publicly executed. The remaining hostages were displayed in cages in the town square. Blackwell posted a substantial reward for information leading to Maggie's capture, dead or alive. Their successes were tempered by losses. Maria returned from a reconnaissance mission with news that made Maggie's blood run cold. They've captured Michael Hayes, she reported, her face grim. Blackwell's men caught him setting explosives at the mine office. Is he alive? Maggie asked. For now. They're holding him in the hotel, planning a public interrogation tomorrow. Maria hesitated. There's more. Blackwell sent for reinforcements, a gang operating near Silver Springs. They could arrive within days. The news spread like wildfire through the camp, further dampening morale. That evening, Maggie found Sarah sitting alone at the mine entrance, staring out at the darkening sky. We're losing, aren't we? Sarah asked without turning. Maggie settled beside her. We've had setbacks. People are talking about surrendering, about trying to negotiate with Blackwell. Sarah's voice was hollow. They say we can't win, that we're just bringing more suffering to the town. Fear talking, Maggie replied, though she understood the sentiment. Their position was precarious, their resources limited. What do you think we should do? Sarah looked surprised at the question. Me? You organized much of this resistance before I ever became involved, Maggie reminded her. I'd value your perspective. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I think we need to show the town that resistance is possible, that Blackwell isn't invincible. She turned to Maggie. We need a victory, something visible that will rally people's spirits. Like freeing Hayes? Bigger. Sarah's eyes shone with sudden determination. We need to expose Blackwell, show everyone who he really is, not this invincible figure, but just a man who can be defeated. Maggie considered her daughter's words. You may be right, but how? Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. I've been thinking about it. The town needs a symbol, something to believe in. She met Maggie's gaze directly. They need to know the Shadow Marshal has returned. A chill ran through Maggie. Sarah, that's not. It's exactly what we need, Sarah insisted. Your reputation, your badge, they carry weight. People have been whispering about you, wondering if the rumors are true. Imagine what would happen if you confirmed them. I came to Redemption Creek to leave that life behind, Maggie protested. And now Redemption Creek needs that life to survive. Sarah gripped her mother's hand. You told me the badge stands for justice, for protection. This town needs both. Before Maggie could respond, shouts erupted from within the mine. They rushed inside to find chaos, people grabbing weapons, shouting contradictory orders. What's happening? Maggie demanded. Miller pushed through the crowd. Riders approaching from the south, at least 10 men. Blackwell's reinforcements, Sarah asked. No. Miller shook his head. They're from town, our people being pursued by Blackwell's men. Maggie made a split-second decision. Gray, take 5 men and circle behind the pursuers. Miller with me will create a defensive line at the tree line. The rest of you prepare to receive wounded. They moved with practiced efficiency now, days of fighting, having forged them into a more cohesive unit. Maggie and Miller led their group down the slope, taking cover among the boulders that dotted the approach to the mine. In the moonlight, they could see the fleeing townspeople, women and children among them, some wounded, all desperate. Behind them, Blackwell's men fired as they rode, more intent on inflicting terror than taking careful aim. Hold until I give the word, Maggie instructed her fighters. We want them close. The distance closed rapidly. 50 yards, 40-30. Now, Maggie rose, both Colts blazing. Her team fired in unison. 2 of Blackwell's men tumbled from their saddles immediately. A third clutched his arm, losing control of his horse. The remaining pursuers pulled up sharply, surprised by the ambush. As they hesitated, Gray's team opened fire from behind, catching them in a deadly crossfire. The remaining outlaws broke, fleeing back toward town. Get the wounded to Doc Parker, Maggie ordered as the fleeing townspeople reached their position. Among the refugees were several familiar faces, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Weber, and her children, 3 of Maria's girls from the saloon. All bore signs of rough treatment. Many carried only what they could grab in haste. They're burning everything, Mrs. Weber sobbed as Maggie helped her up the slope. Going house to house, taking what they want, destroying the rest. Blackwell's gone mad, Mr. Johnson added, his arm in a crude sling. Says he'll burn Redemption Creek to the ground before he lets rebels hold it. Inside the mine, the new arrivals shared their stories. Blackwell, enraged by the resistance's continued attacks, had abandoned any pretense of occupation in favor of outright terrorism. His men were systematically destroying the town using fire and dynamite to level buildings after looting them. He executed Reverend Walsh this morning. One of Maria's girls reported, her voice shaking. Said it was punishment for the town harboring criminals. The banker and his wife are next scheduled for noon tomorrow. The news hit the camp like a physical blow. Even the hardened fighters like Gray and Miller seemed shaken. The resistance had hoped to weaken Blackwell, gradually force him to withdraw. Instead, they had provoked him to greater violence. Maggie felt the weight of every death, every burned home. This was why she had left the marshal's service, the terrible responsibility of lives and the balanced decisions that led to either salvation or destruction. She had forgotten how heavy that burden could be. As the night deepened, the mood in the camp grew increasingly desperate. Small groups huddled together, whispering about surrender, about fleeing the territory entirely. Even Miller seemed defeated, staring blankly at the wall, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. Maggie found Doc Parker tending to the wounded, his ancient hands moving with surprising dexterity as he stitched a gash on a young boy's forehead. We're losing them, Robert, she said quietly, helping him prepare bandages. They're scared, he replied. Can't blame them. This isn't what most of them signed up for. None of us signed up for this. Maggie's hands stilled. I brought this on them, didn't I? By resisting, by fighting back. The old doctor gave her a sharp look. Blackwell brought this when he rode into town and murdered Thomas Miller. Don't take his sins on yourself. But my sins are plenty, Maggie replied softly. 15 years ago, I hunted men like Blackwell across 3 territories. I told myself it was justice, but there was vengeance in it too. And innocent people suffered for it just like they're suffering now. Parker finished his stitching, patting the boy's shoulder, before sending him back to his mother. Only then did he turn his full attention to Maggie. Let me tell you something, Margaret. When you came to Redemption Creek 15 years ago, you were more dead than alive, not just from your wounds, but inside. His aged eyes held hers. I watched you build a life here, become part of this community, raise that remarkable daughter of yours. You found peace. And now that peace is shattered, Maggie said bitterly. Peace isn't the absence of struggle, Parker countered. It's finding purpose worth the struggle. He nodded toward the huddled groups of townspeople. These people need something to believe in right now, something bigger than their fear. Maggie remembered Sarah's words from earlier. The town needs a symbol. She looked around the cave at the wounded, the frightened, the desperate. These were her people, now had been for 15 years, though she'd kept them at arm's length. You're right, she said finally. It's time they knew who's fighting for them. She straightened, decision made. Call everyone together. Word spread quickly through the camp. Within minutes, nearly 100 people had gathered in the main chamber, faces turned expectantly toward Maggie. She stood on an overturned crate, the lantern light catching the silver in her hair, the badge at her belt. Most of you know me as Maggie Callahan. She began, her voice carrying to the farthest corners of the chamber. The woman who runs the general store, who keeps to herself, who adopted a young girl 12 years ago. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some friends, some merely acquaintances, all now bound together in crisis. What you don't know is that before I came to Redemption Creek, I was U.S. Marshal Margaret Harrington. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some called me the Shadow Marshal. I tracked criminals across the frontier for 15 years, bringing them to justice when no one else could. The murmurs grew louder. Maggie could see recognition dawning on some faces, disbelief on others. My husband, James Callahan, was also a marshal. We hunted the worst criminals in the territories together until he was murdered by the Bishop gang. Her voice remained steady, though the old pain flickered in her eyes. After I brought Bishop to justice, I came here seeking peace, a quiet life away from violence. She looked around the chamber, meeting the shocked gazes of people who thought they'd known her. I believed I could leave that life behind. I was wrong. Some battles find you whether you want them or not. Now, why tell us this now? Called a voice from the back, Mr. Peterson from the bank. Because you deserve to know who's leading you, Maggie replied, and because Blackwell needs to know who he's facing. Miller stepped forward, his earlier despondency replaced by a new fire. I've seen her shoot, seen her plan. The stories about the Shadow Marshal don't do her justice. He raised his voice. I say we're damn lucky to have her. Shutun. A few scattered cheers answered him, but many faces remained skeptical, even hostile. Where was this famous marshal when our homes were burning? Demanded Mrs. Lawrence, who had lost her husband in the initial occupation. Where was she when Sheriff Miller was gunned down in the street? She was hiding, another voice called, playing shopkeeper while we suffered. The accusation stung, but Maggie didn't flinch. You're right. I turned my back on who I was, on what I could do. That was my mistake, and I'll carry it. She straightened. But I'm here now, and I know how to fight men like Blackwell. It's too late, Mrs. Lawrence cried. The town is lost. My Arthur is dead. Sarah stepped forward, then moving to stand beside her mother. It's not too late, she declared, her young voice ringing with conviction. Redemption Creek is more than buildings. It's us, all of us. And as long as we're willing to fight, it's not lost. Doc Parker joined them, followed by Maria, then Gray, rising painfully from his sick bed. One by one, the original resistance members formed a line behind Maggie. I've known Margaret Harrington's true identity since she arrived, Parker announced. I've seen what she can do. If anyone can lead us against Blackwell, it's her. A thoughtful silence fell over the crowd. Maggie could see the struggle on their faces, hope wrestling with despair, courage with fear. I don't ask for your forgiveness, she said quietly. Only your trust for a little while. Blackwell thinks he's broken us. He's wrong. Tomorrow we show him how wrong. How? Asked Timothy Weber, his bruised face grave. They outnumber us, outgun us. By using what they don't expect. Maggie moved to the rough map scratched in the dirt. Blackwell thinks he's facing a ragtag group of civilians. He doesn't know he's facing a marshal with 15 years' experience hunting men like him. She knelt by the map. And he doesn't know about this. From inside her jacket, Maggie withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. She smoothed it out, revealing a detailed tactical map of Redemption Creek and the surrounding area. My husband drew this years ago when we first passed through this region. James had a mind for terrain for defensive positions. Her finger traced the contours of the landscape. He identified every strategic advantage this valley offers: sight lines, natural barriers, choke points. The townspeople gathered closer, their interest piqued despite their doubts. Blackwell thinks he controls Redemption Creek because he holds the main street, Maggie continued. But a town isn't just one street. It's alleys and rooftop cellars and water sources. She looked up, meeting their eyes. It's the people who know every inch of it. Over the next hour, Maggie outlined a new strategy, not hit-and-run attacks, but a coordinated defense that would turn the town itself into a weapon against its occupiers. Using James's map and the townspeople's intimate knowledge of Redemption Creek, they identified key positions, escape routes, and defensive strongholds. We don't need to match them gun for gun, Maggie explained. We need to control the battlefield, dictate where and how the fighting happens. As the plan took shape, Maggie could see hope returning to the gathered faces. They might be outnumbered, but they were no longer helpless. What about Hayes? Miller asked. He's still their prisoner. And the remaining hostages, added Mrs. Weber. Maggie nodded. Freeing them is part of the plan. But first we need to isolate Blackwell from his men. She turned to Maria. Your girls said there's an execution scheduled for noon tomorrow. The banker and his wife, Maria confirmed. In the town square. Then Blackwell and most of his men will be there, Maggie reasoned, which gives us our opportunity to strike elsewhere first. By midnight, they had divided into task forces, each with a specific objective. Gray, despite his injury, would lead the sharpshooters positioned on the hillsides overlooking town. Miller would command the team responsible for freeing Hayes and the hostages. Maria's people would coordinate communications between groups, and Sarah, to Maggie's initial reluctance, would guide the civilian evacuation route, ensuring women, children, and the wounded could reach safety if the battle turned against them. What about you? Sarah asked as the meeting broke up. Where will you be? Maggie checked her weapons one final time. Where Blackwell least expects me. As the resistance prepared for dawn, an unexpected visitor arrived at the mine entrance, one of Maria's girls, breathless from running. They caught Eliza, she gasped as Gray escorted her inside. She was bringing information. Blackwell's men intercepted her near the creek. Eliza Jenkins had been their most reliable spy, working as a laundress in the hotel where Blackwell headquartered. Her capture was a serious blow. Did she break? Maggie asked bluntly. Do they know our plans? I don't think so, not yet, the girl replied. But they're hurting her. I heard the screams as I slipped away. Gray's face darkened. We should move up our timetable. If she talks, she won't, Maria said firmly. Eliza would die first. Which is exactly what concerns me, Maggie interjected. We move at dawn as planned. If Blackwell learns anything from Eliza, it will only be partial information. As the others dispersed to complete preparations, Doc Parker drew Maggie aside. There's still the matter of our traitor, he reminded her quietly. Someone betrayed Gray's mission. They could betray tomorrow's plan as well. Maggie nodded grimly. I've been thinking about that. Only 6 people knew the details of Gray's mission: you, me, Sarah Maria Hayes, and Miller. Hayes was captured, so it wasn't him. You suspect one of us? Parker looked troubled. I suspect everyone until proven otherwise. Maggie's eyes were hard. That's why I've implemented compartmentalization. Each team knows only their part of the plan. Only you and I know the full strategy. And if I'm the traitor? Parker asked with a sad smile. Then we're already lost, Maggie replied frankly. But my instincts say it's not you, old friend. Your instincts were legendary, as I recall. Let's hope they still are. Maggie squeezed his shoulder. Get some rest, Robert. Tomorrow will test us all. Dawn broke cool and clear over Redemption Creek. From her vantage point on the ridge overlooking town, Maggie could see the destruction Blackwell had wrought. Blackened ruins where homes and businesses had stood makeshift gallows, erected in the town square, armed men patrolling the streets. Smoke still rose from several smoldering buildings, including her own general store. Through her spyglass, she observed Blackwell himself emerging from the hotel, flanked by guards. Even at this distance, his arrogance was evident in his posture, the casual way he surveyed his domain. He paused to inspect the gallows, making some adjustment to the nooses, ensuring no doubt that the banker and his wife would have a proper audience for their deaths. Maggie felt the familiar cold focus settling over her, the calm detachment that had made her so effective as a marshal. For 15 years, she had suppressed this part of herself, feared it even. Now she embraced it like an old friend. "It's time," she said to Gray, who lay beside her with his rifle. "Signal the others." Gray raised a small mirror, flashing a coded message to watchers positioned throughout the valley. Answering flashes confirmed receipt the operation had begun. Maggie made her way down from the ridge, circling wide to approach the town from the west. Phase 1 of their plan was already underway, Miller's team creating a distraction at the mine office, while Maria's people cut the ropes holding the makeshift barriers Blackwell had erected at the town's perimeter. As Maggie neared the outlying buildings, gunshots echoed from the north side of town, Miller's diversion working as intended. She could see Blackwell's men rushing in that direction, leaving the western approach temporarily unguarded. Moving swiftly through backyards and alleys, Maggie reached her first objective, the livery stable. Inside, as they had hoped, most of Blackwell's horses were still stabled, guarded by just 2 men. Both were focused on the commotion to the north, leaving their rear exposed. Maggie dispatched them silently, using her knife rather than her guns. With the guards eliminated, she worked quickly, opening stall doors and creating a trail of hay leading outside. From her pocket, she took a small incendiary device of Hayes's creation, simple but effective. Setting it among the hay, she retreated to a safe distance and waited. The resulting fire wasn't large, but it served its purpose. Horses bolted from the stable, panicked by smoke and flames. Their thundering hooves and wild neighing created exactly the secondary distraction Maggie had planned, drawing even more of Blackwell's men away from the center of town. As chaos spread, Maggie proceeded to her next target, the jail where Hayes was now being held, along with the remaining hostages. According to their intelligence, Blackwell had moved all prisoners there overnight, consolidating them for easier guarding while he prepared for the noon execution. She approached cautiously, aware that despite the distractions, the jail would be well defended. 4 guards remained outside, all alert despite the commotion elsewhere in town. Maggie took cover behind a water trough, evaluating her options. A direct assault would be suicide, but time was running short. The operation's success depended on precise timing. Miller's team would be approaching from the north, expecting the jail guards to be eliminated. Her decision was made for her when a bullet splintered the wood beside her head. One of the guards had spotted her movement and opened fire. "They're behind the trough," he shouted to his companions. Maggie rolled to her right as bullets churned the ground where she had been. Coming up on one knee, she fired twice in rapid succession. The first guard fell, clutching his chest. The second staggered, wounded, but still upright. The remaining 2 guards took cover, returning fire. Maggie ducked behind a stack of crates, bullets shredding the wood around her. She was pinned down with limited options for movement. Then came the distinctive crack of a rifle from above, Gray's sharpshooters joining the fight. One of the guards jerked backward, a bullet finding him despite his cover. The other looked up in alarm, giving Maggie the opening she needed. She burst from cover, both Colts blazing. The final guard managed one wild shot before her bullets took him in the shoulder and leg. He collapsed, screaming in pain. Maggie approached warily, kicking his weapon away before checking the others. 2 dead, 2 wounded, but incapacitated. She secured the survivors with their own handcuffs, then moved to the jail door. It was locked as expected. Rather than waste time searching the guards for keys, Maggie positioned herself to the side of the door. "Hayes," she called. "Michael Hayes, stand back from the door." A muffled response came from inside Hayes's deep voice, recognizable even through the thick wood. Maggie took aim at the lock and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The heavy mechanism shattered, and she kicked the door open. Inside, she found Hayes and 5 other prisoners, the banker and his wife, Mrs. Patterson, and 2 miners who had resisted Blackwell's takeover of the mine. All were bruised and dirty, but alive. "About time," Hayes greeted her with a pained grin. His face was swollen from beatings, one eye nearly closed. "Was getting tired of the accommodations." "Can you walk?" Maggie asked, already cutting his bonds with her knife. "Can fight too," he assured her, flexing his massive hands as circulation returned. "Just give me something to hit." Maggie freed the others quickly. "Miller's team will be here any minute to escort you to safety. Hayes, I need you with me." As if summoned by her words, Miller appeared at the door, 3 armed townsmen behind him. "Marshal," he acknowledged with a quick nod. "Streets are clear for now, but Blackwell's men are regrouping at the hotel." "Get these people to the evacuation route," Maggie ordered. "Sarah will guide them to safety." Miller hesitated. "The plan was for me to join you against Blackwell." "Plans change. Your priority is the civilians." Her tone brooked no argument. "Hayes and I will handle Blackwell." As Miller led the freed hostages away, Maggie turned to Hayes. "How many men does Blackwell have left?" Hayes considered. 10, maybe 12, still combat ready. He lost 4 yesterday, and your distractions probably cost him a few more this morning." "Still poor odds," Maggie observed. Hayes grinned fiercely despite his injuries. "I like those odds better than being outnumbered 20-5. He looked around the jail office, spotting a shotgun mounted on the wall. "That'll do." Armed and determined, they moved through the town toward the hotel. The streets were eerily empty now, the civilians either fled or in hiding, Blackwell's men drawn away by the various diversions. Smoke from the livery fire billowed skyward, and occasional gunshots still rang out from the northern section of town. They were halfway to the hotel when a voice called from a side alley, "Marshal, wait." Maggie whirled, guns raised, then lowered them as Maria stepped into view. "What are you doing here?" Maggie demanded. "You're supposed to be with the communication team." "Gray sent me," Maria replied, slightly breathless. "We have a problem. Blackwell's reinforcements arrived early, at least 15 riders spotted approaching from the east." Maggie absorbed this news grimly. If true, it changed everything. Their carefully orchestrated plan had depended on dealing with Blackwell before any reinforcements arrived. "How long?" she asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." Maria's expression was grave. "Gray says we should abort, fall back to the mine." Maggie considered their options rapidly. Retreat meant abandoning Redemption Creek entirely, possibly for good. Blackwell would hunt down anyone associated with the resistance. Yet staying to fight against overwhelming odds seemed suicidal. "We stick to the plan," she decided, "but accelerate the timetable. Signal Gray to have his sharpshooters target the eastern approach, slow down those reinforcements as much as possible." "And the civilians," Maria asked. "Tell Sarah to start the evacuation immediately. Don't wait for stragglers." Maggie checked her ammunition. "Hayes and I will deal with Blackwell." That was always the endgame. Maria hesitated, something unreadable in her expression. "Be careful, Margaret. Blackwell he's not what he seems." Before Maggie could question this cryptic warning, Maria had disappeared back down the alley. Hayes looked at Maggie questioningly. "What did she mean by that?" "I don't know," Maggie admitted. "But we're about to find out." They continued toward the hotel, moving more cautiously now. If Blackwell had indeed called for reinforcements, it suggested he had anticipated resistance. The question was, how much did he know about their specific plans? The hotel loomed ahead, a 3-story structure that was the grandest building in Redemption Creek. Once a symbol of the town's prosperity, it now served as Blackwell's fortress. 2 guards stood at the main entrance, alert and well-armed. "Front or back?" Hayes whispered as they took cover behind an overturned wagon. "Neither," Maggie replied. "Side entrance through the kitchen. Less expected." They circled around, using the town's alleyways for cover. As they approached the kitchen door, Hayes suddenly grabbed Maggie's arm, pulling her back. "Listen," he hissed. Voices drifted from inside, not the kitchen staff who had long since fled, but men's voices. Blackwell's men using the side entrance just as Maggie had planned to. "Said they'd attack the north side first," one voice was saying. "Marshall's leading that charge herself." "Boss wants us at the square anyway," another replied. "Says it's time to finish this." The door opened, and 4 of Blackwell's men emerged. They had taken only 2 steps when they found themselves staring down the barrels of Maggie's Colts and Hayes's shotgun. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Maggie said softly. "Drop your weapons." For a heartbeat, they hesitated. Then the leader made a fatal mistake reaching for his gun. Maggie's first shot took him in the chest. Hayes's shotgun roared, dropping 2 more. The fourth man threw his hands up in surrender. "Wise choice," Maggie told him. "Where's Blackwell?" "T-Town Square," the man stammered. "Setting up for the execution. Said even if the marshal attacked, he'd finish what he started." Maggie's blood ran cold. The execution was supposed to be the banker and his wife, but they were safely with Miller's team now. Who else could Blackwell be planning to kill? How many men with him? She demanded. 5, maybe 6, the prisoner replied, plus whoever's left from the patrols. Hayes secured the man with his own belt. What now? Marshall Square's too exposed for a frontal assault. Maggie's mind raced. The original plan had been to isolate Blackwell in the hotel, but he had outmaneuvered them by changing locations. The town square offered fewer approaches, more lines of sight for defenders. "We stick with our objective," she decided. "Neutralize Blackwell. End this before his reinforcements arrive." She paused, considering. "But we change our approach." Using James's map etched in her memory, Maggie plotted a new route through the abandoned church that overlooked the square from the south. Its bell tower would provide both cover and elevation. They moved quickly, aware that time was running short. The earlier diversions had served their purpose, but Blackwell's men would be regrouping, and the reinforcements from the east would arrive soon. The church was eerily silent, its interior still bearing evidence of hasty abandonment. Prayer books open on pews, a half-written sermon on the pulpit. Maggie led the way to the narrow stairs that ascended the bell tower. From the top, they had a clear view of the town square and the grim scene below. Blackwell stood on the hastily constructed gallows surrounded by 6 armed men. Before him knelt a single prisoner, a woman with dark hair, her face bloody but her posture defiant. "Eliza," Hayes breathed in recognition. The spy, but it was the crowd that caught Maggie's attention, or rather the lack of one. Instead of the forced gathering of townspeople that usually attended Blackwell's justice, the square was nearly empty. Only his men were present, arranged in a defensive perimeter. "This isn't an execution," Maggie realized aloud. "It's a trap. He's expecting us." As if hearing her words, Blackwell looked up toward the church tower. Even at this distance, Maggie could see his smile, cold, confident, knowing. "Marshal Harrington," he called, his voice carrying in the still air. "I know you're watching. Come out and face me or the woman dies." Hayes raised his shotgun. "I can hit him from here." Maggie placed a restraining hand on his arm. "And his men will kill Eliza instantly." She studied the scene below, calculating angles, distances, risks. "No, he wants me to show myself. Let's not disappoint him." "That's suicide," Hayes protested. "Not necessarily." Maggie checked her weapons one final time. "Stay here. If things go wrong, take the shot regardless of what happens to Eliza or me. Blackwell dies today, one way or another." Before Hayes could argue further, Maggie descended the tower stairs. At the church entrance, she paused, taking a deep breath. Then, guns holstered, but hands ready, she stepped into the street. "Blackwell," she called, walking steadily toward the square. "I'm here. Let the woman go." All eyes turned to her. Blackwell's men raising their weapons, Eliza twisting to see her approach, Blackwell himself watching with that same cold smile. As Maggie entered the square, she noted each gunman's position, each potential piece of cover. If it came to a shootout, her odds were poor but not impossible. "Marshal Margaret Harrington." Blackwell greeted her, stepping to the edge of the platform. "Or should I say Maggie Callahan, the Shadow Marshal herself, living a quiet life in my town." He clucked his tongue in mock disappointment. "What would your husband think?" The casual mention of James sent a spike of rage through Maggie, but she kept her expression neutral. "James would say you talk too much," she replied evenly. "I'm here now. Let Eliza go." Of course, of course." Blackwell gestured, and one of his men cut Eliza's bonds. The woman staggered to her feet, looking uncertainly between Maggie and her captor. "Go," Maggie told her. "Find Miller or Sarah. They'll get you to safety." Eliza needed no further encouragement. She stumbled away, disappearing down a side street. None of Blackwell's men made any move to stop her, further confirmation that this confrontation was what Blackwell had wanted all along. "Just you and me now, Marshal," Blackwell said, descending the gallows steps. His men maintained their positions, weapons trained on Maggie. "Well, and my associates, of course. I'm not as sporting as you might like." "What do you want, Blackwell?" Maggie kept her hands loose at her sides, ready to draw at the slightest provocation. "Want?" He laughed. "I've taken what I want, this town, its silver, its dignity. The only thing left is to deal with you." He circled her slowly, maintaining a careful distance. "Or perhaps I should say it's time for you to deal with me." Something in his voice, a familiar cadence she couldn't quite place, triggered a warning in Maggie's mind. She studied him more carefully. Tall, lean, perhaps 40 years old. His face was partially obscured by a well-trimmed beard, his eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. Nothing in his appearance sparked recognition, yet something about him nagged at her memory. "Do I know you?" she asked finally. Blackwell's smile widened. "I'm hurt, truly, though I suppose it has been many years." And he removed his glasses, revealing eyes Maggie had seen before. Cold, calculating, with a distinctive heterochromia, one blue, one hazel. Recognition slammed into her like a physical blow. "Daniel," she whispered. "Very good, Margaret," he applauded softly. "Though I prefer Frank Blackwell these days, Daniel Rivers was such a pitiful name. The name of an orphan, a charity case." Maggie's mind reeled. Daniel Rivers, a young boy she and James had rescued from a gang that had murdered his family. They had taken him and trained him, even considered adopting him before everything fell apart. "You were just a child," she said, struggling to reconcile the angry, wounded boy with the cold-eyed killer before her. "I was 16 when you abandoned me," he corrected. "Old enough to remember, old enough to learn from your example." "We didn't abandon you," Maggie protested. "After James died, I couldn't be bothered with the extra burden." Blackwell Daniel spat. "You dropped me at that boarding school and disappeared. Said it was for my own good." His face twisted with old pain. 3 months later, I ran away, found my own path, built my own legacy. As an outlaw, a murderer." Maggie's voice hardened. "James would be ashamed." "James is dead," Daniel shouted, his composure cracking. "He died because he was weak, because he believed in justice and mercy and all those noble ideals you taught me." He regained control, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "I learned better lessons on my own." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "It was you," Maggie realized. "You betrayed us to the Bishop gang." Daniel smiled thinly. "Luther Bishop was more of a father to me than James ever was. He found me after I ran away, took me under his wing. When he learned who had raised me," he shrugged, "he made me an offer I couldn't refuse: revenge against the people who abandoned me." "You got James killed." "I got justice," Daniel corrected. "And after you killed Bishop, I swore I'd return the favor eventually. It took me 7 years to track you down to confirm that Maggie Callahan was really Margaret Harrington." His smile returned. "Imagine my delight when I discovered you'd built a whole new life here, complete with a replacement child." At the mention of Sarah, Maggie's hands twitched involuntarily toward her guns. Daniel noticed and laughed. "Don't worry, your precious Sarah is safe. For now. My men haven't found her little evacuation route yet. But they will." He gestured expansively. "This was always about you, Margaret. About making you feel what I felt, helpless, abandoned, watching everything you built burn around you." "You've made your point," Maggie said coldly. "Now what? Kill me and leave?" "Oh, I'm not going to kill you." Daniel stepped closer. "Death would be too merciful. No, I want you to live with the knowledge that you failed. Failed this town, failed Sarah, failed yourself, just like you failed me." From the edge of the square came the sound of approaching horses, many of them. Daniel's smile widened. "Ah, my reinforcements have arrived, right on schedule." He glanced toward the sound. "It seems our time grows short, Margaret, so let me make you an offer: surrender now, and I'll allow Sarah and the other refugees to leave the territory unmolested. Resist, and I'll hunt down every last one of them." Maggie measured the distance between them, calculated her odds against his guards. Even if she somehow managed to draw and fire before they shot her, Daniel would likely escape in the confusion. And if his reinforcements were indeed arriving? "How do I know you'll keep your word?" she asked, playing for time. "You don't," Daniel admitted, "but it's the only chance they have." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Any moment now the riders would enter the square, and Maggie's last opportunity would vanish. She thought of Sarah, of the townspeople who had trusted her, of James and the boy Daniel had once been. Her decision was made. "No deal," she said quietly. Daniel's expression hardened. "Then you condemn them all." "I don't think so." Maggie's hand flashed to her belt, not for her gun, but for a small metal whistle concealed there. She blew a single piercing note. On that signal, gunfire erupted from every direction. The church tower where Hayes waited, the surrounding buildings where Gray's sharpshooters had positioned themselves even from behind Daniel's own men, where Miller and several townspeople had crept into position during their conversation. 2 of Daniel's guards fell immediately. The others returned fire diving for cover. Daniel himself ducked behind the gallows, drawing his own weapon. "Kill her!" he screamed to his men. "Kill them all!" The square exploded into chaos, gunshots, shouts, the crash of breaking glass as bullets shattered windows. Maggie rolled behind a water trough, coming up firing. Her first shot caught one of Daniel's men in the leg. Her second took another in the chest. From her position, she could see Hayes in the church tower methodically picking off targets with his shotgun. Gray's sharpshooters were equally effective, forcing Daniel's remaining men to stay in cover, unable to mount an effective defense. "It's over, Daniel," Maggie called. "Your men are down or pinned. Surrender." His answer came in the form of a bullet that splintered the wood beside her head. Maggie ducked lower, trying to locate his position. He had moved from the gallows, using the confusion to reposition himself. A movement caught her eye, Daniel sprinting toward a side alley. Maggie broke from cover, racing to intercept him. More gunfire erupted around her, but she ignored it, focused solely on her target. Daniel reached the alley entrance just as Maggie rounded the corner of a building. They faced each other barely 20 feet apart. Both raised their weapons simultaneously. 2 shots rang out as one. Maggie felt the burn as Daniel's bullet grazed her side. Her own shot was more accurate, striking him in the shoulder and spinning him around. He staggered but remained upright, turning back to face her, with hatred blazing in his mismatched eyes. "You can't win, Margaret," he snarled, raising his gun again despite his wound. "You never could." Before either could fire again, a third shot cracked through the air. Daniel jerked forward, a look of surprise crossing his face. Behind him stood Sarah, a smoking revolver in her hands. "That's for my mother," she said steadily. Daniel looked down at the spreading bloodstain on his chest, then back up at Maggie, something like wonder in his expression. "She's just like you," he whispered. Then he collapsed to the ground. Maggie rushed forward, kicking Daniel's weapon away before kneeling beside him. The wound was severe through his back and into his chest, likely piercing a lung. "You should have killed me years ago," he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "When I was still innocent." "I'm sorry, Daniel," Maggie said softly. "For everything." A ghost of his old smile crossed his face. "No, you're not." His eyes fixed on something beyond her. "But you will be." With a final rattling breath, Daniel Rivers Frank Blackwell died. Maggie stood slowly, turning to face Sarah. Her daughter stood rigidly, the gun still clutched in her hand, her face pale but composed. "He was going to kill you," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I couldn't let that happen." Maggie moved to her, gently taking the weapon. "You saved my life." Around them, the gunfire had diminished to occasional shots. Miller appeared at the alley entrance. "Marshal." "We've got them on the run," he reported excitedly. "Those reinforcements turned out to be our people." Gray circled around and ambushed Blackwell's real reinforcements 2 miles out. His eyes fell on Daniel's body. "Is that—" "It's over," Maggie confirmed. "Blackwell is dead." Word spread quickly. Within minutes, the remaining outlaws had surrendered or fled. The townspeople who had stayed to fight emerged from their positions, gathering in the square, with expressions ranging from disbelief to exultation. Hayes limped over, his shotgun balanced on his shoulder. "Thought we were goners when we heard those riders coming," he admitted. "Never been so happy to be wrong." "Gray's timing was perfect," Maggie agreed. She looked around at the battered but standing town. "What's the damage?" 3 of our people dead, Miller reported grimly. 7 wounded, including Gray, took another bullet covering our retreat. Doc Parker's tending to them now. And Blackwell's men, 14 confirmed dead, including Blackwell himself. The rest have surrendered or run. Miller's expression darkened. Some of the boys want to hang the survivors. No, Maggie said firmly. There's been enough killing. We'll hold them for the territorial marshal when he arrives. Miller looked like he wanted to argue but nodded reluctantly. Yes, Marshal. As the immediate crisis passed, exhaustion hit Maggie like a physical wave. The wound in her side, though minor, throbbed with each heartbeat. 15 years of peace had not prepared her body for the rigors of battle. Sarah remained by her side, silent but watchful. Maggie could see the weight of her actions settling on her daughter's shoulders. The taking of a human life, no matter how justified, left its mark. Come, Maggie said gently. Let's find Doc Parker. We both need tending. The townsfolk parted respectfully as they walked through the square. Many nodded to Maggie, some even offering quiet thanks or touching her arm as she passed. The fear and suspicion that had greeted her revelation of identity had been replaced by something else, not quite adoration, but a solemn recognition of what she had done for them. Doc Parker had established a field hospital in the church. As Maggie and Sarah entered, he looked up from bandaging a young man's arm. About time you showed up, he grumbled, the relief shown in his eyes. Sit, both of you. He finished with his patient, then came to examine Maggie's wound. Bullet graze, painful but not serious. As he cleaned and bandaged her side, Maggie caught sight of Gray lying on a makeshift cot nearby. The former cavalryman was pale but conscious. Did we win, Marshal? He called weakly. We won, Maggie confirmed. Thanks in no small part to your sharpshooters. Gray managed a pained smile. Guess I'm not too old for this after all. None of us are, it seems. Maggie winced as Parker tied off her bandage. When the doctor finished, he stepped back, studying both women with a critical eye. Sarah needs rest, he declared, and something for shock. Taking a life isn't easy, even when necessary. I'm fine, Sarah protested, though her face remained pale. You will be, Parker agreed, but not today. Maggie wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. He's right. Let's find somewhere quiet. With the battle over the townspeople began the process of reclaiming Redemption Creek. Those who had evacuated to the mine were returning, assessing damage, reuniting with loved ones. The dead, both their own and Blackwell's men, were gathered for burial. Prisoners were secured in the jail under Miller's watchful eye. Maggie and Sarah found a moment's peace in the parsonage, one of the few buildings left relatively intact. As dusk fell, they sat together on a simple wooden bench in the small garden behind the church. Neither spoke for a long time, each lost in her own thoughts. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. He called me your replacement child. Maggie sighed. Daniel was troubled. Even before James died, there was something in him that wouldn't heal. James thought we could save him. I thought so too once. Why didn't you tell me about him? Because it was my greatest failure, Maggie admitted. Not just failing to help him, but failing to see what he was becoming. After James died, I couldn't... She paused, searching for words. I couldn't be responsible for anyone else. I placed Daniel in a school that I thought would help him. When he ran away, I searched for months, but the trail went cold. And then you found me, Sarah said quietly. Yes. Maggie took her daughter's hand. Though perhaps it's more accurate to say you found me. You needed someone, and despite my best efforts to remain alone, I needed you too. Sarah looked down at their joined hands. I killed a man today. I know. I thought I would feel something. Remorse, horror, satisfaction. Sarah's voice was troubled. But I just feel empty. The feelings will come, Maggie said gently. And when they do, I'll be here to help you through them. Like you helped Daniel. Sarah immediately regretted the words. I'm sorry. That was unfair. No, it's a fair question. Maggie's eyes grew distant. Daniel made his choices, as we all do. But I wonder sometimes if things might have been different if I'd been stronger after James died, if I'd kept Daniel with me instead of sending him away. You can't know that, Sarah insisted. Some people are broken in ways that can't be fixed. Perhaps, Maggie squeezed her hand. What I do know is that you saved my life today, and that the town is free because of what you started, not because of what I did. They sat in companionable silence as night fell fully, the stars emerging one by one above Redemption Creek. From the town came the sounds of recovery hammers pounding as temporary repairs were made, voices calling back and forth, even occasional laughter, as the tension of occupation finally broke. "What happens now?" Sarah asked eventually. "Will you become Marshal Harrington again?" Maggie considered the question. "No," she said finally. "That life is still behind me. But I can't go back to being just Maggie Callahan either." "Then who will you be?" A small smile touched Maggie's lips. "Perhaps it's time to stop hiding behind either name. To simply be who I am, Margaret Callahan. Not the shadow marshal, not the shopkeeper. Just me." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to meet her." "You already have," Maggie assured her. "She's been here all along, just buried, afraid. And now. Maggie looked up at the stars, feeling a weight lifting that she had carried for 15 years. "Now we rebuild. The store, the town, ourselves." In the month following Blackwell's death, Redemption Creek began the slow process of recovery. Burned buildings were cleared, new ones begun. The mine reopened under local management, with the miners receiving fairer wages than they had under either Blackwell or the previous owners. A semblance of normal life returned, though normal had been redefined by the occupation and the town's fierce resistance. For Margaret Callahan, formerly Harrington, formerly the Shadow Marshal, the changes were both external and internal. Her general store had been one of many buildings destroyed during Blackwell's final days. With savings and help from the townspeople, she began rebuilding not just the store itself, but her place in the community. The U.S. Marshal's badge remained pinned to her belt, a symbol not of authority, but of identity reclaimed. She had written to the Territorial Marshal's office explaining her long absence and Blackwell's defeat. Their response had been both surprised and respectful, offering to reinstate her commission if she wished. Margaret declined, explaining that her role now was in Redemption Creek. Instead, at the town's insistence, she took on an unofficial position as advisor to the newly elected sheriff, James Miller, who had grown into the role with surprising maturity after his brother's death. Margaret provided guidance on law enforcement training in firearms and tactics, and the benefit of her years of experience hunting outlaws. Sarah, too, had found a new role. The town school had reopened, and she had returned to teaching, though her students now looked at her with a mixture of awe and reverence after her part in the resistance. Beyond the classroom, she had become a voice for the town's future, advocating for changes that would make Redemption Creek stronger, more self-sufficient, and better protected. The transformation of both women was evident one crisp December morning as they made their rounds through town. Margaret, her silver-streaked hair now worn in a single braid down her back, walked with the same quiet confidence she had always possessed, but without the careful reserve that had once defined her public persona. Sarah moved beside her, clipboard in hand, as they noted repairs still needed, supplies to be ordered, tasks to be assigned. "The new roof on the church should be completed by Saturday," Sarah reported as they passed the building, where workers called greetings from the scaffolding. "And Mr. Hayes says the bell tower will be restored in time for Christmas services." "Good. The people need their traditions, especially now." Margaret nodded to Mrs. Weber, who was hanging laundry outside her rebuilt home. The woman smiled and waved back a simple gesture that would have been unthinkable before the occupation, when Margaret had kept herself apart from such casual interactions. Their path took them past the new jailhouse, where Sheriff Miller was instructing a young deputy. He touched his hat as they approached. "Morning, Marshal, Miss Sarah." Margaret had given up correcting the title. "Sheriff, how's young Jenkins working out?" "Learning fast." Miller beamed at his protege, "though he has trouble believing some of your stories." "Which ones?" Sarah asked with a grin. "The one about tracking the Harker brothers through a blizzard for 6 days straight," Miller replied. "Says no one could survive such conditions, much less make an arrest at the end." Hannah, Margaret's lips twitched. "Your deputy has lived a sheltered life, it seems." "That's what I told him." Miller laughed. His expression sobered slightly. "Got word from Fort Carson this morning. Territorial Marshals bringing a judge through next week for the trials. 3 of Blackwell's men remained in custody awaiting justice for their roles in the occupation. Margaret had insisted on proper legal proceedings rather than frontier justice, a position that had initially met resistance but ultimately earned respect. Good. The sooner that chapter closes, the better for everyone. Margaret glanced toward the mines on the hillside above town. Any trouble up at the diggings? Miller shook his head. Quiet as can be. That profit-sharing arrangement Sarah proposed has worked wonders for morale. Sarah ducked her head modestly. It was just common sense. Men work harder when they have a stake in the outcome. They continued their circuit of the town, stopping frequently to consult with citizens about needs and concerns. Margaret marveled at how naturally Sarah had taken to this role. Part teacher, part diplomat, part civic leader. The young woman who had once secretly organized resistance fighters now openly organized community rebuilding with the same passion but greater wisdom. Their final stop was the site of their new home, in store a larger structure than before, with space for expanded merchandise and community gatherings. Hayes supervised the construction, his massive frame seeming perfectly at home amid the rising timbers and stacks of lumber. Right on schedule, he reported as they approached. We'll have the roof on before the first snow, guaranteed. He wiped sweat from his brow despite the December chill. Though I admit I never thought I'd swap my forge for a carpenter's bench. You have a gift for building, Margaret observed. Not just structures. Hayes glanced meaningfully at the crew working alongside him, former miners, farmers, and townsmen who had fought together during the occupation and now labored together in peace. These men built themselves, he corrected. I just provide direction. However, as they surveyed the progress, Doc Parker approached medical bag in hand after treating a minor injury on the construction site. Ladies, he greeted them, his aged face creased with a smile. Coming to check on your empire, Sarah laughed. Hardly an empire, doctor. Just a home and business. And the heart of Redemption Creek, Parker added, whether you acknowledge it or not. He turned to Margaret. I was hoping to catch you. There's a matter we should discuss privately. Margaret raised an eyebrow but nodded. Sarah, can you finish here without me? Of course. Her daughter was already deep in conversation with Hayes about some detail of the construction. Margaret walked with Parker away from the building site toward his office at the other end of town. What's troubling you, Robert? She asked when they were out of earshot. The old doctor's expression grew serious. I received a letter yesterday from Silver Springs. Margaret tensed. Silver Springs was the nearest large settlement 3 days' ride to the west. Bad news. Concerning news. Parker withdrew an envelope from his pocket. It seems Blackwell Daniel had a partner we never encountered. Someone who provided funding information, perhaps even the initial intelligence about your whereabouts. Edward Bishop. Margaret guessed, her voice hardening. Parker looked surprised. How did you know? I've been expecting this since we found documents in Blackwell's belongings. Margaret took the letter, scanning its contents quickly. Luther Bishop's son. He would have been just a boy when I killed his father. He's a man now, Parker said grimly. And according to my colleague in Silver Springs, he's been asking questions about Redemption Creek. About you. Margaret folded the letter, her expression thoughtful rather than alarmed. History repeating. Another child seeking vengeance for a parent's death. This is serious, Margaret, Parker insisted. If Bishop's son is anything like his father, he's worse, Margaret interrupted. Luther Bishop was a ruthless killer, but he had a crude code of honor. From what I've pieced together, Edward is a different breed, entirely calculating, patient, sophisticated. Then you understand the danger. Margaret nodded slowly. I do, but I won't run, Robert. Not again. I wasn't suggesting you should. The doctor studied her face. The Margaret Harrington I knew would have been planning her counterattack already. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. And you think Margaret Callahan isn't... I think you found balance, Parker replied. Between the marshal who hunted outlaws and the shopkeeper who built a life here. I just hope that balance serves you well in what's coming. They had reached his office, a small but tidy building that had survived the occupation relatively intact. Inside, Parker poured 2 measures of whiskey, handing one to Margaret. To preparation, he toasted, raising his glass. To clarity, she countered, touching her glass to his. As they drank, Parker regarded her thoughtfully. You're different, you know, since the occupation ended. For better or worse? Better. Definitely better. He set his empty glass down. You carry yourself more freely now. The weight you brought to Redemption Creek 15 years ago, it's not gone, but it seems lighter. Margaret considered this. I spent all those years trying to bury Margaret Harrington to become someone else entirely. What I needed was to reconcile the two parts of myself. And have you reconciled them? She nodded slowly. I think so. The marshal taught me courage, justice, persistence. The shopkeeper taught me community patience, the value of ordinary days. Margaret smiled fully, then a rare expression that transformed her weathered face. Sarah taught me how to be both. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside, horses approaching at speed, voices raised in greeting. Margaret moved to the window, instantly alert. 3 riders had entered town trail, worn but upright. At their head, a familiar figure in a weathered cavalry coat. Robert Gray returned from his scouting mission to Silver Springs. Gray's back, Margaret observed, setting down her drink. 3 weeks earlier than expected. That can't be good. They stepped outside as Gray dismounted, his movements stiff from hard riding. Despite his recent wound, he had volunteered to gather intelligence about Edward Bishop and possible remaining members of Blackwell's gang. His early return suggested urgency. Marshal, he greeted Margaret with a respectful nod. Doctor, we need to talk. Within minutes, they had convened in the jailhouse, Margaret Parker Gray and Sheriff Miller. Gray spread a map on the desk, his expression grave. Bishop's on the move, he reported without preamble. Not just asking questions anymore. He's assembled a gang smaller than Blackwell's, but better armed, better disciplined. How many? Margaret asked. 15 riders. Former soldiers, mostly not common outlaws. Gray indicated positions on the map. They've been moving systematically, hitting settlements that supported Redemption Creek during the occupation. 3 towns so far. Miller leaned forward. Casualties. Minimal, strangely enough. Gray frowned. They're not there for random violence. They interrogate specific people, those connected to the resistance. Those who might know about you, Marshal. He met Margaret's eyes. Bishop's hunting you, but he's being smart about it. Gathering intelligence before striking. And now, Parker asked. Now they're headed here. 3 days out by my estimation. Gray circled an area on the map. They've established a camp here at Copper Creek. Resupplying, finalizing their plans. Margaret studied the map thoughtfully. 15 men, she mused. Not enough for a full frontal assault, not against a prepared Redemption Creek. They're not planning one, Gray agreed. From what my sources tell me, Bishop intends something more targeted. A strike against key individuals, not the town itself. Me, Margaret concluded. Sarah, you, Miller, the leaders of the resistance. Gray nodded grimly. Cut off the head and the body falls. Sheriff Miller straightened his hand, moving instinctively to his gun. We should send riders to Fort Carson, request military support. 4 days round trip minimum, Gray pointed out. They'll be here before help arrives. And then we prepare to defend ourselves, Miller insisted. We've done it before. Margaret raised a hand, silencing further discussion. We're missing something here. Bishop isn't Blackwell. He doesn't want territory or silver. This is personal for him, and that makes him both more dangerous and more predictable. What are you suggesting? Parker asked. A familiar coldness settled in Margaret's eyes, the look that had earned her the name Shadow Marshal years ago. I'm suggesting we change the terms of engagement. Bishop expects us to fortify, to react defensively. Instead, we'll take the fight to him. An ambush? Gray looked intrigued. At Copper Creek? No. Margaret shook her head. Too heavily defended, and they'll be expecting pursuers. We need to draw them out, separate Bishop from his men. How? Miller demanded. If they're as disciplined as Gray says, with the right bait, any predator can be lured into a trap. Margaret tapped the map decisively. And I know exactly what Edward Bishop wants most in the world. Understanding dawned on Parker's face. You can't be serious, Margaret. Offering yourself as bait is suicide. Not if it's done right, she countered. Bishop wants me, yes, but more than that, he wants to see me suffer as his father suffered. That gives us leverage. For the next hour, they debated strategy. Margaret's plan was audacious, risky, but potentially decisive. Rather than waiting for Bishop to strike Redemption Creek on his terms, They would create a scenario he couldn't resist, one that would separate him from his main force and allow them to neutralize the threat permanently. As the details took shape, Miller looked increasingly troubled. "This plan puts a lot of weight on civilians," he objected. "If anything goes wrong—" "Every plan has risks," Margaret acknowledged. "But these people have proven they're not just civilians anymore. They fought for their town once and they won." "And the cost?" Parker asked quietly. "Last time we lost good people." "There will be a cost," Margaret admitted. "There always is. But if we succeed, Redemption Creek will be truly free, not just from Bishop, but from the shadow of Blackwell and everything that came before." Gray, who had been silent for some time, finally spoke. "It could work," he said slowly, "but it would require perfect timing, perfect execution, and complete secrecy," Margaret added. "Bishop has proven he has sources. Until we know who they are, this plan remains between the four of us." They parted with grim determination, each assigned specific preparations that could be made without raising suspicion. Margaret headed directly to find Sarah, knowing her daughter would sense something was wrong, regardless of how carefully Margaret concealed it. She found Sarah at the school preparing lessons for the following day. The one-room schoolhouse had been among the first buildings restored after the occupation, a testament to the town's priorities and Sarah's standing in the community. "Mom," Sarah greeted her with a smile that faded as she noted Margaret's expression. "What's happened?" Margaret closed the schoolhouse door behind her. "Gray has returned with news." As concisely as possible, she outlined the situation, Edward Bishop's approach, his apparent intentions, the plan they had formulated. Sarah listened without interruption, her face growing increasingly serious. "You're using yourself as bait," she said when Margaret finished. "Not a question, but an accusation." "It's the most effective strategy," Margaret replied evenly. "It's reckless. It's necessary." Sarah set down her chalk with deliberate care. "There are other ways. We could evacuate key personnel, lead Bishop on a chase away from town, and leave Redemption Creek vulnerable. Bishop's men would simply take hostages, force our return." Margaret shook her head. "No, Sarah. This ends here now, or it never ends at all." For a long moment they regard each other in silence, the former marshal accustomed to making life or death decisions, and the young woman who had learned too quickly about the costs of violence. "You promised," Sarah said finally, her voice low. "After Blackwell, you promised no more risks, no more battles." Margaret sighed. "I promised to stop running from who I am. Sometimes that means making hard choices. Like offering yourself to Bishop, like risking everything we've built here." Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I can't lose you, Mom. Not after everything." Margaret crossed the room, taking her daughter's hands. "You won't lose me. But Bishop must be dealt with, or we'll never have peace." Sarah searched her mother's face. "There's something you're not telling me. Something about this Bishop." Too perceptive, Margaret thought. Sarah always had been. "Edward Bishop has a personal vendetta against me," she admitted. "I killed his father, Luther Bishop, leader of the gang that killed James." "The same gang Daniel betrayed you to," Sarah realized. "It's all connected." "Yes, past and present, woven together in ways I never anticipated." Margaret released Sarah's hands, moving to the schoolhouse window. Outside, children played in the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the gravity of the conversation within. "Bishop will come for me regardless. At least this way, we choose the battlefield." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then with visible reluctance, she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Relief and pride mingled in Margaret's chest. "For now, nothing that would raise suspicion. Continue your normal routine, but be ready to move when the time comes." "And when will that be?" Margaret's expression hardened. "Soon. Bishop's men are 3 days out. We act the day after tomorrow." The next morning dawned, cold and clear frost rimming the windows of temporary shelters and rebuilt homes throughout Redemption Creek. Margaret rose before sunrise, her mind already cataloging preparations, contingencies, weak points in their plan. She dressed with deliberate care, practical clothing that would allow freedom of movement, but nothing that would suggest imminent action. Sarah joined her for a quiet breakfast, both women maintaining the facade of normalcy despite the tension humming between them. They spoke of ordinary things, construction progress, school matters, supplies needed for the coming winter. Anyone observing would have seen nothing unusual in their interaction. After breakfast, Margaret made her customary rounds through town. She stopped at Miller's office where they exchanged brief coded updates on preparations. She visited Hayes at the construction site ostensibly to check progress, but actually to confirm his role in tomorrow's operation. She even called on Maria at the saloon now rebuilt and serving as an informal community center, as well as a place of business. Everything's arranged, Maria confirmed in a low voice as they shared coffee in her small office. My girls will ensure your message reaches Copper Creek by nightfall. Her dark eyes showed concern. Are you certain this is wise? Margaret Bishop sounds like a dangerous enemy. The most dangerous kind, Margaret agreed. One with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Maria studied her old friend thoughtfully. You've faced worse. Perhaps. But I was younger then with fewer attachments. Margaret's gaze drifted toward the window where Sarah could be seen crossing the street toward the school. More to lose now. Also more to fight for, Maria pointed out. And you're not alone this time. Margaret smiled faintly. I was never truly alone, just too stubborn to admit I needed others. By mid-afternoon, their preparations were as complete as possible without attracting attention. The trap was baited, the players positioned. All that remained was to wait for Bishop to make his move. That evening, as twilight settled over Redemption Creek, Margaret stood in the doorway of their temporary home watching the town prepare for night. Lamps were lit in windows, the saloon grew lively with music, and conversation guards took up their positions at the town's perimeter, a precaution maintained since Blackwell's defeat. Sarah joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. It feels so normal, she observed. No one would guess what's coming. That's the point, Margaret replied. Bishop has spies watching the town. They need to see business as usual. They stood in companionable silence for a time, each lost in her own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke the question that had been troubling her all day. What if he doesn't take the bait? What if he suspects a trap? Margaret considered this. Then we adapt. But he'll come, Sarah. Men like Edward Bishop always do. Their hatred doesn't allow for caution. Like Daniel, Sarah murmured. Similar but different too. Daniel's hatred stemmed from abandonment, from feeling betrayed by those who should have protected him. Margaret's voice held old regret. Edward Bishop was raised on revenge, taught from childhood that his purpose was to avenge his father. How can you know that? Because that's what men like Luther Bishop do to their sons. Margaret's expression darkened with memory. I saw it often enough in my years as a marshal. Men who twist their children into weapons, who pass their hatreds down like heirlooms. Before Sarah could respond, a rider appeared at the edge of town, one of the lookouts they had positioned on the road to Copper Creek. He dismounted quickly, speaking to Sheriff Miller, before continuing toward Margaret's home. He's coming, Margaret said, tension evident in her posture. Earlier than expected. The rider confirmed her assessment moments later. Movement at Copper Creek, he reported breathlessly. Bishop received your message and is mobilizing his men. They'll reach the meeting point by dawn. Margaret nodded, absorbing this information. Their original plan had assumed more time. Bishop's accelerated response meant adjustments would be needed. Tell Miller to ready the first team, she instructed the rider. Gray should move his sharpshooters into position now under cover of darkness. And find Hayes, he'll need to prepare the charges immediately. As the rider departed, Sarah turned to her mother. What does this change? Timing, not strategy, Margaret replied, already moving to gather her equipment. Bishop is eager, that's good. Eager men make mistakes. Or move more recklessly, Sarah countered, which puts everyone at greater risk. Margaret couldn't argue with that assessment. She strapped on her gun belt, checking each weapon methodically. We'll adapt. We've faced worse odds. Against Blackwell, we had time to prepare to train people. Sarah's voice betrayed her concern. This is different. Yes and no. Margaret finished her preparations, turning to face her daughter. Blackwell had more men but less purpose. Bishop's force is smaller but more focused, more deadly. Each challenge requires its own approach. She crossed to a trunk in the corner, removing a small wooden box. Inside lay her U.S. Marshal's badge, polished and gleaming despite its age. Margaret pinned it to her vest, no longer hidden, but prominently displayed. Bishop wants the Shadow Marshal, she said quietly. It's time he met her. Throughout the night, Redemption Creek prepared. On the surface, the town appeared to slumber peacefully, but beneath that calm exterior, a coordinated defense took shape. Gray's sharpshooters moved into position on the surrounding hillsides. Hayes and his team laid charges at strategic points along the approach roads. Miller organized the town's defenders into small mobile units, ready to move at a moment's notice. And at the center of it all, Margaret Callahan, once more fully embracing her identity, as Marshal Margaret Harrington, directed operations with the quiet authority that had once made her legend throughout the territories. Dawn was just breaking when the lookout returned. With his final report, Bishop and his men had passed the outer markers. They would reach the designated meeting point within the hour. "It's time," Margaret told Sarah, who had refused to sleep, insisting on helping with preparations instead. "Remember your role. No unnecessary risks." Sarah nodded, though determination shone in her eyes. "The same applies to you." Margaret smiled faintly. "When have I ever taken unnecessary risks?" "I could provide a list," Sarah replied dryly, but her attempted humor couldn't quite mask her fear. They embraced briefly, fiercely. Then Margaret stepped back, assuming the mantle of command once more. "Tell Miller to signal the outer teams," she instructed. "Everyone in position. No moves until my signal." Sarah departed to relay the orders, and Margaret was left alone for a final moment of preparation. She checked her weapons one last time, adjusting the badge on her vest. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped out to face whatever the day would bring. The meeting point was a dried riverbed half a mile outside town, chosen for its clear sightlines, multiple approach routes, and the natural cover it offered for Gray's sharpshooters on the ridges above. Margaret arrived first as planned, positioning herself on a rocky outcropping that provided both visibility and a defensible position if needed. She didn't have to wait long. Within 15 minutes, riders appeared on the horizon, a tight formation, moving with military precision. Margaret counted 13 men, not the 15 Gray had reported. 2 held back then, a precaution or a flanking maneuver. At their head rode a figure that could only be Edward Bishop. Even at a distance, Margaret could see the resemblance to Luther. The same tall, lean build, the same way of sitting a horse as if born to it. As they drew closer, other details emerged: expensive clothing, a silver-trimmed saddle-twin revolvers, worn in a cross-draw position favored by gunfighters more concerned with speed than accuracy. Bishop raised his hand, halting his men 100 yards from Margaret's position. He continued forward alone, his confidence evident in every movement. Margaret remained where she was, watching his approach with the stillness of a predator. When he was 30 feet away, Bishop reined in his horse. For a long moment, they simply observed each other, the legendary marshal and the son of the outlaw she had killed. "Margaret Harrington," he said finally, his voice cultured, almost pleasant. "The Shadow Marshal herself. I was beginning to think you were a myth." "Edward Bishop," she replied evenly. "You've come a long way for this meeting. 15 years and 1,000 miles. He removed his hat, revealing features that blended his father's harshness with a refinement Luther had never possessed. "Time well spent, I'd say. To what end revenge for a father who would have killed you as readily as any stranger if it served his purpose?" Bishop's smile never wavered, though something cold flickered in his eyes. "You misunderstood my father, Marshal. He was a visionary, not a common bandit. He taught me many valuable lessons, such as patience, planning, the value of alliances." Bishop gestured expansively. "How else do you think I found you, after all these years? Your secret was well kept, but everyone has a weakness, a blind spot." Margaret's expression remained impassive, though her mind raced. "Daniel Rivers." "Among others," Bishop's smile widened. "Daniel was useful if somewhat unstable, too emotional, too fixated on his personal grievances." "You used him," Margaret realized. "Fed his hatred, pointed him at Redemption Creek while you remained safely distant. I prefer to think of it as a partnership. He wanted to make you suffer. I wanted to find you." Bishop shrugged elegantly. "Our goals aligned for a time. Until he failed. Until your little town proved more resilient than anticipated." For the first time, a hint of respect colored Bishop's tone. "I underestimated both you and Redemption Creek. A mistake I won't repeat." Margaret studied him, noting the controlled breathing, the relaxed posture that concealed ready tension. Edward Bishop was dangerous in a way his father had never been: disciplined, educated, calculating. Luther had been a force of nature, all brutal impulse and raw charisma. Edward was something altogether more sophisticated. "What do you want, Bishop?" she asked directly. "You found me. Here I am. What I want is both simple and complex, Marshal." He leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "I want justice." "Justice!" Margaret's voice hardened. "Your father murdered dozens, including my husband. He received justice. Did he shot in the back while attempting to surrender? That's the story you filed with the marshal's office." Bishop's pleasant facade slipped momentarily. Curious how none of his men who survived tell the same tale. Margaret's hand drifted closer to her gun. "Outlaws lie, Bishop, especially when facing the gallows. Perhaps, or perhaps the legendary Shadow Marshal took liberties with the truth." Bishop's eyes narrowed. Perhaps she executed a wounded man in cold blood, then built her reputation on a foundation of lies. The accusation hung in the air between them. Margaret neither confirmed nor denied it, her expression revealing nothing. "I've studied you, Marshal," Bishop continued after a moment. "Tracked down everyone still living who encountered you during your career. I've assembled quite a detailed picture of Margaret Harrington, her methods, her accomplishments, her inconsistencies." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Margaret asked, her voice steady, despite the unease growing within her. Bishop smiled again, cold and calculating. "That you're more like my father than you'd ever admit. That beneath your badge and your righteousness, you're just another killer who found a convenient justification." For a breathless moment, Margaret weighed her response. The truth was complex, as it always is with lives lived in the margins, between law and violence, justice and vengeance. Had she crossed lines in her pursuit of Luther Bishop? Undoubtedly. Had she executed him while he attempted surrender? No. But she had denied him medical attention that might have saved his life, watching coldly as he bled out in the dust. "You didn't come all this way to debate ethics, Bishop," she said finally. "State your purpose." "Very well." He straightened in his saddle. "I propose a reckoning, not just for you and me, but for this town that harbors you. A cleansing fire, if you will. Threatening civilians doesn't speak well of your moral high ground," Margaret observed.